Hey guys, tonight we're boarding a Victorian sleeper train bound for Scotland. Not the polished Downton Abbey fantasy version, this is the real deal. The year is 1873, the platform is dimly gaslit, and the scent in the air is a curious mix of coal smoke, rain-soaked wool, and distant meat pies. Somewhere behind you, a street violinist is tuning up slightly off-key, and a porter is shouting something about inquiries, with the exact tone of someone who does not want you to make one. You've just stepped out of a horse-drawn cab and are now standing in the rush and rumble of Euston Station. Not that the Victorian era believed in rush as we know it. The pace is more tense loitering. The ticket clerk eyes you with the suspicion reserved for anyone who might pay with half pennies or ask follow-up questions. Your trunk is already scratched, even though this is the first time it's seen daylight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing this sleepy little map light up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You clutch your slightly damp paper ticket, which reads Glasgow Caledonian Sleeper, Compartment 7C. If that sounds romantic, you're in for a gentle letdown. The train glints faintly in the gaslight, long rows of varnished mahogany carriages lined up like respectable coffins on wheels. A sign above your carriage door reads, Gentlemen of Means Only, and you sincerely hope no one looks too closely at your boots. A thin man with the face of a disappointed hawk and the hat of someone who takes his job too seriously gestures you aboard. Mind the gap, he murmurs, though there's barely a gap to mind. Your foot lands on an iron step slick with soot, and just like that, you're inside the belly of the beast. The interior smells of polish, dust, and something faintly medicinal, possibly eucalyptus, possibly failure. The lighting is provided by gas lamps and brass fixtures, which hiss like angry cats and flicker just enough to make your eyes second-guess the shadows. Passengers drift past you in various states of confusion. A portly man is loudly demanding his wife's warming pan, while a youth in an absurd cravat murmurs something about fennel seeds. You press forward down a narrow corridor, brushing past coats that seem to bristle with disapproval. Your compartment is precisely what the word cramped was invented for. Roughly the size of a modern elevator and with half the charm, it contains a velvet bench that folds into a lumpy bed, a luggage rack just high enough to break your skull on, and a small pull-chain gaslight daring you to use it. You sit. The bench wheezes beneath you. Somewhere nearby, a toilet flushes, or rather, someone empties something into a bucket with a splash that makes your stomach second-guess dinner. Victorian London is still rattling outside, but here, inside this gently claustrophobic box, time begins to fuzz at the edges. There's something dreamlike about the repetition, the clack of boot heels on the corridor floor, the muffled shouts from the platform, the gentle thuds of trunks being hoisted and dropped with the care of someone not paid enough to care. A tall woman passes your door with a hat the size of a personal carriage. She mutters Aberdeen to no one in particular. A steward follows, hunched under the weight of a wicker tea hamper and what appears to be a small, judgmental cat. It's hard to believe, but people paid quite a premium for this experience. Overnight rail service in the 1870s was relatively new, and it wasn't for the faint of wallet. For the well-heeled traveler, politicians, landowners, clergymen of decent standing, it offered a way to make distance disappear overnight, or at least suffer through it horizontally. The working classes, if they traveled at all, did so in unheated third-class carriages, with wooden benches and wind included at no extra cost. Their sleeper experience was more of a nap while upright and shivering arrangement, often among crates of chickens or leaky milk cans. Historians still argue whether the first-class sleepers were truly luxury or simply the least terrible option available. Advertisements of the time boasted mahogany interiors, gas lighting, and attentive staff, but omitted mention of mice, mattress lice, and the constant likelihood of derailment. And yet, there's something oddly cozy about it. The gentle creak of the wood, the smell of pipe tobacco clinging to every surface, the polite illusion that you're doing something very important simply by sitting still in an upholstered box. You unpack your travel necessities, a copy of Punch, a packet of digestive biscuits, two of which are already broken, and a monogrammed handkerchief that smells faintly of lavender and regret. Outside your window, the night begins to press in, curling around the flickering lamps like a cat curling around an ankle. A porter knocks once and opens the door with the self-importance of a man who's memorized the Queen's shoe size. "Will sir be requiring a hot water bottle?" he asks without warmth. You nod. He hands you a small rubber sack with a cork in it and vanishes before you can thank him. It's unclear whether the bottle is warm from steam or from the last guest's feet. Soon there's a jolt, a deep mechanical sigh, and the train lurches forward. The station begins to slide past, lamps melting into darkness. Your journey has officially begun. You're on a Victorian sleeper train to Scotland. Sleep will be optional. The carriage jerks again, less like a noble steed and more like a mule with opinions, as the train picks up its slow, determined pace. Outside your window, the shadows of London stretch and warp, lamplight smearing across brick walls and chimneys. You press your forehead lightly to the glass. Mist immediately blooms there, and you withdraw like a startled Victorian aunt. As you settle into your surroundings, you finally get a good look at your sleeper car. It's a masterpiece of 19th century ambition, paneled in dark walnut with ornamental carving that could have been elegant if it hadn't been interrupted by generations of scratches, dents, and whatever that mystery stain is near your pillow. The upholstery is maroon velvet, officially. In practice, it's maroon and whatever other color it has absorbed over the years. The padding beneath is firm in a did we accidentally use granite sort of way, and there's an ever so slight tilt to the bed, like the train itself is politely reminding you not to get too comfortable. There's also no privacy to speak of. Your door has a lock, but it's the decorative kind, more of a social suggestion than a true security feature. You pull the drapes shut, though they resist and creak loudly in protest. They smell faintly of pipe smoke, coal, and ghost stories. Just as you consider lying down, a voice from the corridor intrudes. Clear, sharp, and distinctly northern. 3 minutes late, and it's always this same bloody cow. You freeze. Cow? Yes. As it turns out, the train has paused. Not at a station, but on the line itself. Outside, the soft clanging of an iron signal post echoes through the dark. The cow in question, it seems, has wandered onto the tracks, a recurring character in this pastoral drama. Victorian train travel was many things, but punctual wasn't always one of them. Rail schedules were tight in theory and aspirational in practice. Cows, sheep, and, on one infamous occasion, an entire brass band on parade did cause delays. Historians still debate whether such rural interruptions were more common on lines through Yorkshire and the borders, or whether the stories merely survived better in those parts because of the dry wit of the locals who recorded them. Eventually, a porter stomps past your door again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sounds of mild swearing and a coaxing, "Come on, Daisy, there's a good girl." You allow yourself a tired smile. That cow probably has her own opinion on sleeper trains. While you wait, you examine the small amenities in your compartment. A fold-down sink, chipped but still functional, sits beneath a clouded mirror that shows your face in soft, candlelit confusion. There's a little shelf with a glass water jug and matching tumbler, both of which tremble slightly with every rumble of the train. You take a cautious sip, trying not to imagine the last dozen lips that touched it. You also notice a discreet compartment in the wall. Sliding it open reveals a set of emergency candles, 2 matches, 1 broken, and a spare hand towel embroidered with what looks like the initials JPL and some sort of reddish stain. You close that compartment again, quietly. Your ears begin to attune to the symphony of the carriage, the whistle of the engine far ahead, the rhythmic ka-thunk of wheels on rails, and the occasional muffled cough from neighboring cabins. Every now and then something metallic clinks, or a door slams too hard, or the whole train creaks like it's composing its own bedtime story. The gas lamps hiss on. Outside, the night deepens. There's something oddly calming about it all. You're fully at the mercy of the train and its schedule, or lack thereof, and for once, your only job is to listen to the wood panels groan and hope your hot water bottle doesn't leak. Suddenly, a knock. You startle, then open the door to reveal a boy no older than 14 in a slightly oversized uniform. His name tag reads N, Etheridge. He holds out a narrow envelope. This was slipped under the door, he says with the confidence of someone who knows you're too sleepy to argue. You thank him, but before you can ask who delivered it, he's vanished, possibly into another time zone. You open the envelope. Inside, a blank card, and pressed into it a single rose petal. Scented, red, slightly crushed. Romantic? Possibly. Wrong compartment? Almost certainly. The mysteries of train travel are many. Lost mail, wrong orders, unsolicited rose petals. It's all part of the ambience. Returning to your seatbed hybrid, you stretch out at last. Your knees bump the wall. Your foot hits the curtain tie. You adjust, and then adjust again. It's like sleeping in a Victorian game of Tetris. Still, you try. The train begins to move again with a low whine, like an old man settling into a bath. You hear the cow's offended bellow fade behind you. London is long gone now. The countryside opens up, silent and infinite under the gaslit sky. Hills roll unseen in the darkness, rivers slide beneath wooden bridges, and every so often the whistle cries out, long and lonely and beautiful. You close your eyes and listen. The night train to Scotland has finally resumed. The click-clack of the wheels settles into a sleepy rhythm, like a lullaby written entirely in iron and steam. You're lying as flat as you can on your sleeper bench, limbs folded in improbable configurations, trying to coax rest from a surface that has the warmth and give of an old church pew. Still, you've given up fighting the bed. It's you or it. And frankly, you're not sure you're winning. The gaslight overhead flickers once, then steadies. You consider turning it off, but it requires standing up, twisting a tiny brass valve, and possibly losing an eye. You decide it's safer to simply squint in its general direction and pretend it's candlelight. Outside the carriage, darkness has swallowed the countryside. Trees and hedgerows blur past like dreams you can't quite remember, and clouds pass lazily across a moon so full and pale it looks like it too needs a nap. It's around this point, say 11:30 p.m., that the train enters what Victorians affectionately referred to as the quiet stretch, which in reality means absolutely nothing happens for 40 miles. No stations, no scheduled stops, just the steady drone of the wheels, the occasional moan from the axles, and a smell that is somehow both sooty and faintly of ham. You shift again. The mattress underneath you emits a crunching noise that raises questions you'd rather not ask. A narrow shelf beside your head holds two essential items, a tin dish labeled soap and a handbell. The soap appears to have retired sometime during the Crimean War, and the bell is for summoning the porter, should you wish to be ignored with formality. You think about ringing it, but you're not entirely sure what for. A fresh towel? Tea? Emotional support? The porter has not been seen since the hot water bottle incident. Some say he walks the corridors still, endlessly folding invisible sheets. It's during this reflective lull that you take inventory of your belongings. Your valise is tucked under the bench. Inside, one spare pair of underthings, a crusty sandwich wrapped in yesterday's newspaper, a modest bottle of smelling salts, a Victorian essential mostly used after hearing what London's fog was made of, and a book, Baxter's Compendium of Polite Conversational Phrases, 2nd edition. You open it at random and read aloud in a whisper, "May I trouble you for the salt?" You smile. Politeness was an art form here, a dance choreographed down to the teaspoon. Even being trampled required apologies. Then, with impeccable comedic timing, there's a knock at the door. Not a loud one, just a tentative tap-tap, as though the person on the other side isn't sure you're real. You rise, slightly hunched, and slide open the door. It's the night porter. He looks as though he's aged significantly since last you met. Hair slightly askew, waistcoat buttoned one button too high. His expression suggests that he's seen unspeakable things in compartment C4. "Will sir be requiring anything further before the next bit?" You blink at him. "The next bit?" He nods solemnly. "The bumps." "Ah, yes, the bumps. You've read about this. There's a patch of track somewhere north of Northampton, badly laid, barely maintained, and deeply resented by anyone with a spine. It's notorious among travelers, conductors, and anyone who's ever attempted to balance tea on a saucer in motion. Best to brace, the porter advises, and keep any delicate organs tucked in, so to speak. Then, with the dignity of a man who's just warned you about your own spinal future, he disappears once more into the corridor. Sure enough, within 5 minutes, the train begins to buck and rattle like a particularly unamused ghost is shaking it from below. Your bed lurches. The water jug tips. Something in your luggage shifts and utters a dull thump, like a Victorian ghost politely asking to be let out. You hang onto your mattress with both hands. It feels oddly like riding in a wooden wheelbarrow down a cobbled hill. Historians still argue whether these poor track conditions were the result of bad materials, hasty construction during the railway mania of the 1840s, or just good old-fashioned cost-cutting. Whatever the reason, Victorian trains were notorious for reminding passengers of every bone in their body. Eventually, the bumps subside. You exhale. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slams, too hard to be an accident. Then laughter. Possibly drunken. Possibly ghostly. Victorian compartments weren't always soundproof, which meant that sleep was something you negotiated with your neighbors, unless you were rich enough to buy the whole carriage, which some did just for silence. You lie back again, more gingerly this time, and let your thoughts wander. Rail travel was new and dazzling to the Victorians. Before trains, the fastest way to get from London to Scotland was by mail coach, a brutal all-weather ordeal involving constant rattling, the threat of highwaymen, and the gentle experience of sharing a seat with someone's goat. Suddenly, you could leave after dinner and wake up near Edinburgh. Miraculous. Even if you hadn't actually slept, there's a distant whistle. Another jolt, but softer now. The night is pulling you into its rhythm, and despite yourself, your eyelids begin to flutter. Maybe it's the gaslight. Maybe it's the cow having moved on. Or maybe it's the simple truth that there's nothing left to do but drift. The carriage rocks gently. The cold seeps in from under the door, but the water bottle is still vaguely warm. The noise of the wheels becomes white noise, comforting in its repetition. You feel, for the first time, like you might actually doze off, until, of course, the lavatory issue arises. But that is for another section. It starts with a gurgle, not the sort that comes from your stomach, which is mostly given up in despair after that crusty sandwich, but the unmistakable metallic wheeze of a Victorian lavatory attempting to announce its presence. You shift under your woolen blanket, trying to ignore it. Maybe it's just the pipes. Maybe it's not your problem. Maybe, there it is again, a sputtering sound like a kettle coughing up its last regrets. Welcome to the curious world of Victorian train toilets. You sit up reluctantly, your joints creaking in sympathy with the carriage. The gaslight still burns with that faint hiss, and your compartment is just warm enough that stepping into the corridor feels like entering an icebox wearing only optimism and socks. But nature is calling, and you've been advised by the guidebooks to answer promptly, as Victorian plumbing was a luxury with conditions. Pulling your door open, you peer into the hallway. It's quiet. The air smells faintly of cold iron, stale biscuits, and someone else's cologne. Probably Mr. I only travel with lavender oil in compartment B2. You shuffle toward the lavatory, counting your steps to distract from the ominous clangs coming from behind the wooden panel. Victorian sleeper train bathrooms were marvels of compact design, if by design you mean make it fit somehow. The lavatory is a narrow cubicle, not unlike a wardrobe that's lost its ambition. A single oil lamp burns above the mirror, casting your face in shadows you didn't ask for. The sink is a shallow basin with a hand pump tap, usually dry by 10 p.m. You try it anyway. 2 disheartened drips emerge, then a sigh. Even the plumbing is tired. And then, of course, there's the toilet. Ah yes, the drop flush lavatory, a marvel of Victorian compromise. Toilet technology was still catching up with the speed of train travel. Instead of a sealed tank system, many rail carriages used a rather direct method. Waste dropped straight through its chute onto the tracks below. There's even a little brass sign above the bowl that reads, in all seriousness, "Do not use lavatory while train is in station," which sounds like a gentle guideline until you realize that failing to follow it might earn someone on the platform a rather disagreeable surprise. Historians still argue whether the engineers who designed these direct-to-nature systems truly didn't foresee the consequences, or simply didn't care. Either way, Victorian rail lines were not places you lingered near in sandals. You sit gingerly, listening to the echo of distant snoring down the corridor. The seat is wooden, cold enough to reawaken ancient fears, and exactly as uncomfortable as you'd expect from an age where cushions were for furniture and not behinds. You do what must be done, quickly and with the speed of someone conducting light espionage. Then comes the matter of hygiene. A porcelain dish offers a lonely sliver of carbolic soap. A towel hangs on a peg. It is technically dry, but somehow also damp. You consider the handkerchief in your pocket and decide it may be promoted to temporary backup. With all duties performed, you return to your compartment. The hallway feels longer now, the gaslights flickering, as if whispering secrets. Your footsteps echo softly. You pause to peek out the window beside the emergency brake, which you are definitely not supposed to touch, but which beckons anyway, like a red button in a museum. Outside, nothing, just the infinite ink of the British countryside, peppered with occasional shapes that might be trees or possibly werewolves. You slide your compartment door shut behind you, pull the bolt, and sit heavily on your bed. The water jug has stopped trembling, but it's not quite full anymore. You're not entirely sure if it's evaporation or if the ghost from compartment C4 has had a sip. You lie back. The mattress accepts you like a reluctant host, tolerated, not welcomed. Sleep still eludes you, but at least now your bladder isn't the one leading the rebellion. Victorian trains didn't exactly encourage deep slumber. Even if you were lucky enough to afford a sleeper berth, as you are, the carriages rocked, rattled, and sometimes emitted a shriek when the axles took offense at a particular bend. For those in third class, sleep was performed upright, wrapped in wool coats, with heads knocking gently together like sad Newton's cradles. And let's not forget, if you were a woman traveling alone, things became far trickier. Etiquette guides of the era warned ladies not to journey without male chaperones lest they be mistaken for actresses, an unforgivable reputation in certain social circles. Female-only compartments were available on some lines, but they were limited and often located near the engine, where noise and soot were most generous. You glance at the clock above your door, gilded, small, and perpetually 3 minutes behind. Midnight. You're now officially in the worst part of any overnight journey. The what-if hour. What if you never fall asleep? What if the train derails? What if you forgot your boots at the last station and they're now being used to flavor someone's broth? You roll over, adjusting the thin pillow, and pull the blanket tighter around your shoulders. You could ring for the porter again, but let's be honest. What could he possibly bring at this hour that would help? A scone? A small lecture on compartment etiquette? Instead, you listen. The train whispers on. Somewhere far ahead, a signal changes with a metallic sigh. A sleepy bird chirps and gives up. In the compartment above yours, someone shifts and snores again. The same 4 notes. Every time, like a wind-up clock with adenoids. But slowly, ever so gently, your limbs begin to sink. The mattress is still unforgiving, but your body no longer fights it. You drift not into full sleep, but into a kind of pre-dream state. A warm, heavy limbo where your thoughts unfold like crumpled maps. Outside, the train curves northward, and you, finally, begin to follow. The dream doesn't quite come, not properly. Instead, you drift in that peculiar liminal space between waking and sleeping. The one where you're entirely certain you've just invented a new kind of biscuit and solved the mystery of Stonehenge, only to forget both the moment your eyelids flicker. The train keeps moving, slow and certain, like it's been doing this for centuries. There's a kind of trust in its motion now. You can feel it settle into the night, its wheels humming an ancient lullaby known only to soot and steam. You lie there, wrapped in the stiff embrace of a wool blanket that smells faintly of coal dust and very faintly of lavender, like someone once stored it in the same room as a sachet and then quickly regretted it. The air inside the compartment has gone colder, one of those creeping chills that seeps through windows under door frames and into your socks. You curl tighter. The quiet is interrupted by a distant clank. Then a second one. Then a rattle that definitely wasn't there before. You lift your head slightly. Somewhere below you, or possibly above, Victorian trains are not known for spatial logic. Something is being moved. Crates? Luggage? An unusually aggressive tea trolley? Hard to say. You remain still, listening as the noise fades, replaced again by the faithful rhythm of steel on steel. One thing is certain, you're well into the Midlands now. Towns have thinned. The stars, when you peek past the curtain, are clearer, sharper, no longer diluted by city gaslight, but cold and unapologetic, hanging over the fields like tiny gas lamps of their own. And with that change in geography comes a change in fellow passengers. You hear them in fragments, a low, that murmured conversation behind the wall. A giggle, possibly from a child or from an adult who's had one too many thimblefuls of port. Then the unmistakable sound of a harmonica. It is not a good harmonica. You sit up halfway, blanket draped over your shoulders like a very indecisive ghost, and lean toward the door. The music is meandering, off-key, and either being played by someone who's never seen a harmonica before, or someone for whom this is an elaborate act of revenge. Either way, it's a classic feature of sleeper train life. In the absence of modern distractions, no phones, no podcasts, no Sudoku, Victorian passengers found other ways to pass the time. Some wrote long, looping letters by lamplight, some read improving novels, and some, like your current neighbor, filled the corridor with the musical equivalent of a dog learning Morse code. Historians still argue whether these onboard entertainments were encouraged or merely tolerated by the railway companies. Some trains featured official music saloons or lounge cars. Others had impromptu performances, singing, storytelling, even chess tournaments if the car was steady enough. But on this line, tonight, you get harmonica jazz in E-flat, possibly. Eventually, the melody collapses into a wheeze, followed by an apologetic cough and silence. The train breathes with you. You settle again, pulling the blanket up to your chin, and this time you notice something different. The smell. It's faint, but it's there. Roasted nuts. Almonds? Maybe chestnuts? Definitely something warm and toasted. Your stomach, long ignored, perks up with sudden optimism. You sit up and lean toward the door, sniffing dramatically like a cartoon bloodhound. The smell is real, and now you hear it. Wheels, smaller ones, rolling up the corridor. The snack trolley. Yes, friends, on certain Victorian lines, particularly those running overnight, there were modest food services offered to first and second class passengers. Nothing extravagant, but enough to stave off midnight hunger pangs. A soft knock on your door. You swing it open to reveal a woman in a starched uniform pushing a wooden trolley laden with tiny tins and teapots. "Would sir care for a light refreshment?" she asks, with the weary patience of someone who's offered tea to thousands and rarely received thanks. You blink at the array before you. Little pastries, warmed nuts in paper cones, 2 varieties of meat pie, both indistinct in origin. And of course, tea, always tea. You select a small pie, dubious but warm, and a paper cone of almonds. The tea is poured from a battered copper pot into a cup that looks like it's survived 3 wars and a clumsy butler. You hand her a coin and thank her. She nods. "You're just ahead of the curve, you are. Folk will be waking up peckish in about 20 minutes. Whole corridor turns into a feeding frenzy, I tell you." Then she's off again, the trolley squeaking into the distance. You close the door and sit with your bounty, cross-legged on the too-firm bed. The pie is fine. The almonds are better. The tea is strong enough to revive small mammals. You eat slowly, listening to the train and letting your mind wander. It's easy to forget how new all this was to the Victorians. Only a few decades earlier, the idea of crossing England by train was as absurd as flying. Now, the tracks stretched for thousands of miles, weaving together cities, towns, and villages like thread through a patchwork quilt. It changed everything, where people lived, how they worked, what they dreamed about. But tonight, all that progress is contained in this narrow compartment. You finish your tea, the cup rattles slightly as you place it back on the shelf. You lie down again, a little fuller, a little warmer, and perhaps, just perhaps, a little closer to sleep. Your eyelids drift. The harmonica does not return. Sleep comes, but not in one grand, sweeping descent. It arrives in fragments, like postcards sent from the edges of slumber. A few minutes here, a moment there. You doze off mid-thought and wake up mid-snore, confused, cold, and convinced you've invented indoor plumbing. The train hasn't stopped. It rarely does for long at night. The goal, after all, is to reach the border by dawn, when the lamps in Edinburgh flicker on and the station porters begin to complain about their knees. But even when you're asleep, the train never is. At some point, minutes, hours, time means nothing now. You are awakened not by noise, but by silence. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, like someone has paused the world. You open one eye. The compartment is dark, save for the low blue glow of a gas lamp 2 cars down. You realize with a mild sense of dread that the train has stopped. Completely. No rocking, no rattling, just stillness. You sit up. Outside, the world is equally still. No town, no station, just a field, and a rather mournful-looking cow who appears to have strong opinions about passenger rail travel. You squint. Fog has begun to pool around the trees. The moon is gone, tucked behind clouds like it's decided this part of the night doesn't concern it. The quiet is interrupted by a faint clatter, someone walking the tracks. A figure in uniform passes by your window, lantern in hand. It swings with a slow rhythm, painting brief amber arcs on the glass. Then another figure. Then two more, all moving toward the front of the train. This does not feel like standard procedure. Victorian trains were notorious for unscheduled pauses, especially in the countryside. Sometimes it was a mechanical fault, sometimes it was poor visibility, and occasionally it was sheep. Lots of sheep. You listen harder. Nothing. You reach for your coat, still hanging by the door, and slip it on. The fabric is stiff, itchy, and inexplicably heavier than it was yesterday. Possibly rain, possibly ghosts. Carefully, you open your door and peer into the corridor. A few other passengers are doing the same. A man in a paisley dressing gown pokes his head out, mutters something in French, and disappears again. Two women in matching bonnets stare at each other like they've both agreed not to ask questions. Farther down, the harmonica player is mercifully silent, possibly asleep, possibly gagged by public consensus. Then comes the voice. Ladies and gentlemen, we appear to have encountered a minor obstruction. The announcement is delivered by the train conductor, tall, dignified, and wearing a cap at such an angle that you suspect it's glued on. He speaks from the far end of the car, standing just inside the vestibule. Nothing serious, he adds, just a temporary inconvenience. This, of course, is Victorian for, we don't know what's going on either. You step closer. A few others join. No one says anything. It's that peculiar camaraderie of strangers, briefly bonded by confusion and a lack of proper shoes. The conductor clears his throat. There seems to be a vehicle on the track ahead. A cart, possibly. Abandoned. Our crew is in the process of removing it. An abandoned cart? You blink. Yes, it's possible. The rural countryside of 19th century Britain was a patchwork of small roads, farm paths, and... Sorry, is this a lane or a riverbed crossings? Sometimes carts did wander onto the rails, usually when left overnight near a crossing. Horses spooked, drivers fell asleep, or wheels simply buckled under the strain of time and questionable craftsmanship. Historians still debate how frequently these incidents occurred. Railway companies, for obvious reasons, preferred not to advertise them, but they did happen, and they were deeply unromantically inconvenient. You return to your compartment as instructed. The train remains still. A few minutes pass, then 20. You lie back down. It's funny how quickly you grow used to a sound. The rhythm of the wheels had become your lullaby, your metronome. Now, in its absence, you feel adrift, as if the world itself has forgotten to turn. The wind picks up slightly. A low whistle of air snakes through the window seams. You pull the blanket over your ears, but it does little to dull the silence. And then, just when you've resigned yourself to a very long contemplation of ceiling stains, movement, a faint jolt, then another. The train grumbles awake like a sleepy bear with a hangover. The whistle sounds once, a low, polite note, and the wheels begin to turn. Slow at first, then faster. You exhale. You are, somehow, absurdly grateful. The countryside slides past again. Trees become brush. Fog peels away from the hills. The cow vanishes, presumably off to write a letter of complaint to the Board of Railways. You nestle into your blanket once more. Maybe this time you'll sleep properly. Maybe this time your dreams will take you somewhere with softer bedding and fewer announcements. You close your eyes. The train carries on, whispering secrets to the darkness. Sleep, at last, arrives with the unceremonious grace of a tipsy but well-meaning aunt, stumbling into your consciousness, knocking over a few thoughts, and settling in for a brief stay. You dream of locomotives made of marzipan, of Queen Victoria judging a pie contest, of your blanket gaining sentience and asking for better working conditions. It's fragmented, nonsensical, and oddly soothing. But it doesn't last. There's a knock at your compartment door. You blink awake, mouth dry, hair obeying laws of physics no longer practiced. For a moment, you forget where you are, when it is, or why someone's rapping at your chamber like a butler announcing a duel. Morning service, comes a voice. Would you care for tea? Ah, yes, you're still on the train, and it is, apparently, morning. Victorian morning, to be precise, which means it's still dark, vaguely moist, and far too early for cheerfulness. You pull the blanket up to your chin and debate the relative merits of consciousness. But the promise of tea is strong, stronger than your will to sulk. You crack the door open to reveal a young porter with a tray. The tea is already poured, steaming in a fine china cup with a saucer that somehow looks disappointed in you. A biscuit sits beside it, shaped like something that once aspired to be a scone. You accept it with the solemn nod of one admitting defeat. Morning has won. Should be in Edinburgh by 9, the porter says, weather permitting, and sheep. You murmur something that may or may not be words and close the door. As you sip the tea, overbrewed, undermilked, and yet somehow perfect, you notice the carriage has changed. The light outside is gray now, edged with the suggestion of dawn. The train glides more smoothly, as if it too has resigned itself to the new day. You open the curtains slightly. Fields roll past, sparse trees, a fence doing its best to keep up. In the distance, a church spire leans into the mist like it's trying to overhear the weather. It's peaceful. Bleak, but peaceful. Victorian trains at daybreak were their own kind of theater. Passengers emerged from their compartments like ghosts from the crypt, blinking, tousled, and unsure whether to speak or pretend sleep never happened. The smell of burnt coal mingled with stale cologne. Wrinkled cravats were adjusted, hair was wrestled into place, corsets were, very reluctantly, retightened. You make a half-hearted attempt at grooming. The mirror is still unflattering. Your hair defies topography. You splash a bit of water on your face from the chipped jug, which does little but make you damp and resentful. Then comes the first corridor shuffle. You open your door to stretch and find others doing the same. A man in a monocle nods. A woman in a bonnet stifles a yawn so dramatic it could be considered performance art. The harmonica player is mercifully gone, or possibly being detained somewhere with excellent soundproofing. You overhear snippets. Can't sleep on these beds, I tell you. My back's like a broken fiddle. Said it was venison, but I'm sure that pie was lying. If we're late again, he'll cancel the luncheon. Victorian travel. Equal parts endurance test and gossip generator. You return to your tea. Historically speaking, morning tea on a train was considered an essential civilizing act. Even third-class passengers were sometimes offered a basic breakfast, a hunk of bread, a slice of cheese, and a nod from a tired conductor. But in first and second class, there were rituals. A light breakfast might include eggs, if the kitchen had survived the journey, toast grilled over coal embers, and marmalade thick enough to be used as sealant. You glanced at the biscuit again. It has the texture of history. Still, you eat it, because it's warm and it's there and you're Victorian now. This is who you are. The train whistle sounds again. Brief, firm, and slightly nasal. You feel the tempo shift beneath you, a bend in the track, a tightening of energy. You're getting closer. Somewhere beyond the fog lies Scotland, and with it, the terminus. It's worth noting that Scottish railways in the Victorian era were notorious for being both indispensable and occasionally unhinged. Fiercely competitive, the major railway companies raced to outdo one another, laying tracks at breakneck speed, building bridges with bravado instead of engineering, and publishing wildly optimistic timetables that ignored things like physics or weather. One infamous line once promised a journey between Glasgow and Edinburgh in under an hour. It worked once. Then it rained. Historians still argue whether this was ambition or hubris, or a uniquely Scottish mixture of both. You gather your belongings slowly, the coat still itchy, the hat still indignant, the book you never read now full of biscuit crumbs and the faint scent of tea. You pack it all into your bag with the weary grace of someone who survived the night and has stories to tell, or at least mild complaints. The conductor passes by again, tipping his hat with mechanical courtesy. Should be crossing the 4th bridge within the hour, he says. Weather's fair. No rogue goats this time. You blink. Last week, he explains with a sigh, one stood on the tracks and refused to move. We had to bribe it with oatcakes. The train lurches slightly. You sit. The landscape is changing again. Hills rise gently. The trees become hardier, more wind-beaten. Stone fences cut across the fields like scars from old battles. There's a softness to the colors, a palette of wet greens and soot-stained grays that speaks of history, poetry, and sheep. You sip the last of your tea. Scotland is coming, and the train, creaking but determined, is carrying you to it. The wheels sing a slightly different tune now, less of a clatter, more of a hum. as though the train itself recognizes that it's entering Scotland and wishes to appear composed. You, meanwhile, are somewhere between wistful and slightly over-caffeinated, staring out the window as the mist pulls back like a stage curtain. And what a show. The fields have shifted, wilder now, less manicured. Stone cottages, squat and resolute, perch at angles that suggest the land doesn't particularly want them but tolerates them anyway. Sheep scatter in slow motion across hillsides like nature's marshmallows. The fences are thicker, older. Everything here has the energy of something that could survive a gale and still host a tea party afterward. Your compartment is now officially too bright. Victorian gas lamps, once flickering with cozy gloom, have given way to full daylight. Not that it's particularly sunny. This is the Highlands-adjacent region of Scotland in the 1870s, after all. Sunlight arrives by appointment, and only if it hasn't been double-booked with rain. You tug the curtain, but it's no use. The train is wide awake, and soon everyone else will be too. In the corridor, you hear the clink of crockery, the polite muttering of people trying to pretend they don't need the toilet, and somewhere, impossibly, a violin. You can't tell if it's being played well or just confidently, but it adds something cinematic to your view. Victorian sleeper trains often became something else entirely in their final hour, a curious limbo between travel and arrival. Luggage was rearranged. Hats were reshaped, boots were polished by people crouching awkwardly in narrow compartments, and small mirrors were wielded with a level of intensity that suggested personal transformation was still possible with 10 minutes and the right moustache wax. You stand up and stretch, your body producing a series of creaks and snaps that would have earned applause from a Victorian marionette. Your back has developed a new angle, possibly a hinge. Still, you feel oddly triumphant. You made it through the night. You are, in the loosest possible sense, rested, and your digestive system has graciously decided not to protest the biscuit incident. So far, time to prepare for arrival. You gather your few things, double-check your pockets, and give your reflection a firm nod. This version of you, slightly rumpled, teacup-wielding, time-zone disoriented, is now ready to enter 1870s Edinburgh, but not before one last miracle, the Forth Bridge. Now you may be thinking, hang on, that's the big red cantilever thing built in the 1890s, isn't it? You're quite right, but before that iconic bridge, there was another way across the mighty Firth of Forth, a method considerably less grand, more temperamental, and twice as cold. The train ferry. Yes, a ferry. For trains. At this point in your journey, the rail line ends at the southern shore of the estuary. To get across to the northern side, trains were rolled carefully onto large flatboats which carried the entire railway carriage across the choppy water like an industrial Noah's Ark. Once across, the carriages were rolled back onto land and coupled to a fresh locomotive. And here's the fun bit. Passengers usually stayed on board for the crossing. Historians still debate whether this was due to efficiency, confidence, or just a flagrant disregard for physics. You, however, are spared this particular terror. Your train is scheduled to reroute over a temporary viaduct that clings to the coast like a drunk trying to dance. It was built hastily, and nobody quite trusts it, but it stands, for now. The train slows as it approaches the estuary. Your view expands, endless gray water, a smear of silver sky, and somewhere in the distance, the city, Edinburgh. Even from here, the skyline is unmistakable, the rocky silhouette of Arthur's Seat, the tall spired buildings layered like the pages of a forgotten book, the castle perched so confidently on its volcanic plinth that it might as well wink at you. And it smells strangely of salt and soot and something faintly floral. Gorse, maybe, or maybe just the detergent used at the last laundering stop in Berwick. The porter appears one last time, gently rapping on doors and announcing, 10 minutes, ladies and gents. Prepare for arrival. 10 minutes. You fumble for your gloves, misplace your hat, re-find your hat inside your gloves. The bustle has begun. Outside your door, people are already in the corridor. A woman adjusts her bonnet for the fourth time in as many minutes. A man with a stiff upper lip and stiffer knees sighs and taps his watch like he's personally responsible for the train's velocity. The violinist has stopped. Either he's preparing to disembark or he's been intercepted by someone with a broom. You glance out the window one last time. The final curve of track wins its way into Waverley Station. The buildings grow taller, the land flattens, and the last of the countryside gives way to soot-covered tenements and shop fronts, advertising patent tonics and improbable cures. And then, with the grace of a dowager in heels, the train rolls to a gentle, almost dignified halt. You've arrived. It's Edinburgh, 1870s edition. Cold, bustling, brilliant, and now yours to explore. But for now, you wait. Because in true Victorian fashion, the doors won't open for at least another 5 minutes while someone finds the correct paperwork, unbolts a gate, and possibly argues with a goat. You sit down. You made it through the night. The train creaks in satisfaction, and somewhere, behind you, beside you, maybe even below, a harmonica begins to play again. But only briefly. The station platform unfurls outside like a stage set revealed by the lift of a velvet curtain. Men in wool coats and top hats stride purposefully toward nowhere in particular. Women descend from carriages with the air of people pretending not to be exhausted, and porters scurry like caffeinated ants, wrangling trunks the size of wardrobes and parcels, wrapped in so much twine they resemble Victorian sculptures. Waverley Station in the 1870s is a place of organized chaos. The roof is a marvel of iron and glass, holding back the dull Scottish morning like a parent reluctant to wake the children. Steam billows from every direction, casting long shadows and lending the scene a dreamlike quality. The whole place smells like coal, rain, and someone's aggressively boiled eggs. You step down from the train, boots hitting the platform with a thunk that feels oddly ceremonial. You survive the journey. You are in Scotland. You are, by all visible measures, awake. Now what? You take a moment to look around. Edinburgh is not London. It doesn't try to be. It's older, moodier, more vertical. The old town looms above you like a stony cathedral to questionable plumbing. The new town lies to the north. Less new now, of course, but still respectable, with its grid-like streets and elegant Georgian facades. But before you can contemplate any of that, you must first escape the station. This is not as straightforward as it sounds. In Victorian Waverley, the platforms sprawl across multiple levels. Some are accessed by staircases, so narrow they appear to have been designed by someone deeply bitter about feet. Others require one to pass through a series of tunnels, gates, and polite disagreements with station staff, who seem permanently unimpressed by passengers, trains, or existence in general. You follow the crowd. It's a bit like herding yourself through molasses, but eventually you find yourself at the outer concourse, a broad, echoing space filled with carriages, carts, and one man selling suspicious pies from a cart that may or may not have been cleaned this century. You consider your options. If you were a proper Victorian traveler, you'd have arranged for someone to meet you. A carriage from a respectable hotel, perhaps, or a cousin with a stiff handshake and access to hot water. But you, dear listener, are traveling solo, and in a city like this, that's not a bad thing. Victorian Edinburgh was a study in contrasts. The soaring enlightenment of the new town versus the medieval grit of the old. Scientists rubbed elbows with poets. Tailors worked next to apothecaries who brewed questionable tinctures in the back room. And just a few streets apart, you could find both the finest bookshops and the dodgiest pubs in all of Scotland. Historians still argue whether the city's greatest strength was its academic vigor or its unmatched ability to get into trouble after dark. You step onto Princess Street, which in this era is beginning to take its shape as the city's most fashionable promenade. There are fewer shops than you might expect, more formal buildings, grand hotels, and a surprising number of pigeons wearing the expressions of disgruntled magistrates. A carriage driver offers you a ride. His beard is magnificent, his teeth less so. You decline politely and begin walking. Your boots click over the cobbles. The morning air is brisk, scented faintly with wet stone and something herbal, perhaps the waft of a street vendor's barley broth. You pass a newspaper boy shouting about something incomprehensible and urgent. A pair of lawyers, still in their capes, argue in Latin just loudly enough to make sure you know they went to university. And then you see it. The castle. Perched high above the city like a great stony sentinel, Edinburgh Castle dominates the skyline. It's less a building and more a pronouncement. Here, it says, we have seen things. Indeed, it has sieges, royal births, gunpowder plots, and more than a few inconvenient ghosts. You stare at it for a moment, unsure whether you want to visit or simply applaud from a distance. It looks like the kind of place where pigeons go to study military history. Instead, you turn toward the old town. Your path narrows. The buildings grow taller, more angular. Narrow closes. Those steep little alleyways branch off from the main road like side quests. You pass bakeries, tobacconists, bookbinders, and a shop selling only miniature portraits of Robert Burns. The streets here aren't straight. They wind, dip, and tilt like they were drawn by a cartographer with excellent whiskey and poor balance. But there's charm in the chaos. Every step feels like it might lead to something forgotten by time. You pause at a corner. A young girl sells heather in small bundles wrapped with twine. She nods at you, says nothing. You buy a sprig, tuck it into your lapel, and feel suddenly more Scottish than you have any right to be. The old town is waking up. Church bells chime, a dog trots past with a parcel in its mouth, and the demeanor of a seasoned courier. And above it all, the ever-present caw of crows, because no Gothic city is complete without its feathery sound designers. You follow the scent of baking bread toward a narrow stairwell marked Flesh Market Close, a name both literal and historically accurate. It once led to Edinburgh's meat market, and now to an excellent bakery if your nose is correct. You descend. The city folds in around you. Stone walls, iron railings, flickering gas lamps that haven't been replaced yet. You feel, quite literally, immersed in history, and mildly hungry, but also content, because you are no longer on the train. You are, at last, in the heart of Victorian Edinburgh. Boots dusty, coat rumpled, tea coursing gently through your veins. The journey was long, the sleep questionable, and the harmonica unforgivable. But you made it, and the adventure is just beginning. You emerge from the close into a narrow street lined with awnings and gaslit windows, the scent of fresh oatcakes now unmistakable. A baker props open the door with a flour sack, waving steam and warmth into the chill morning air. You nod, he nods, and an entire conversation takes place without a single word. That, too, is very Edinburgh. The shop is small, low-ceilinged, and visibly not up to fire code. Not that codes have much to say in 1870. Baskets of bread line the shelves, each labeled in precise copperplate. Barley bannocks, baps, treacle loaves. You select a round, golden oatcake, exchange a halfpenny, and step back outside, feeling victorious. It is slightly sweet, slightly chewy, and wholly satisfying, even if it leaves a little flour on your waistcoat. Down the street, two chimney sweeps argue about whose turn it is to scale a roof that's currently belching black smoke like a dragon with indigestion. You pass them just as one of them says, "Well, if you fall, at least the view will be nice." Practical optimism, a vital survival trait in the city. The cobbles glisten with the morning damp. A carriage rattles past, pulled by a horse with a personality, if not a name. The driver offers a perfunctory "mind" as the wheel misses your foot by a whisker. You feel oddly grateful. Victorian courtesy is not dead, merely rushed. Turning uphill, you reach a gentle curve of the Royal Mile, where the shops begin to include curiosities, glass-eyed taxidermy, surgical tools turned paperweights, volumes of poetry bound in cracked leather. One window displays a painted sign, wigmaker and perfumier, services, discreet and punctual. Another promises leeches, fresh and effective. You step aside to let a woman pass, dressed in a sea of ruffles, her skirt hoisted just above the puddles. She glances at your flower-specked coat and offers the tiniest smirk. Whether in judgment or solidarity, you'll never know. And then you hear it. A long, low whistle from the south. Faint, but clear. A train. Still running, still breathing steam across the border. Even here in the middle of Edinburgh, the railways thread their invisible paths through daily life. Smoke drifts from the station beyond the rooftops. Somewhere, someone is boarding, someone is arriving, someone is waiting by a window just like you did hours ago. You think of your sleeper car, the creaky bunk, the inexplicable smell of pickled onions, the harmonica still echoing faintly in your inner ear. It feels like a week ago. It feels like yesterday. Time bends oddly on Victorian rail. Historians still argue whether the true impact of rail travel in this period was economic or existential. Yes, it unified markets, shrank distances, brought milk to cities and newspapers to villages, but it also changed how people thought about time itself. Trains demanded schedules. Schedules required clocks. And clocks demanded a shared understanding of when, precisely, now was. Before trains, noon was whenever the sun was highest. After trains, noon was whatever the timetable said it should be. You glance up at the clock tower, which tells you it is 8:30, give or take a chiming bell. By modern standards, it's imprecise. By Victorian standards, it's a marvel. Either way, it tells you you've got a bit of time before anything formal needs doing. So you do what many travelers have done, then and now. You meander. Edinburgh rewards the slow wanderer. Every alley has a secret, every building a story. You find yourself pausing before statues you don't recognize, plaques written in hand-lettered gilt, and door knockers shaped like lion heads or gargoyles having a bad day. Down one lane, a printmaker's shop boasts political cartoons with noses that take up half the page. Down another, a hatter arranges feathers with all the solemnity of a priest. You stop at a bookseller's window. Secondhand volumes, their titles faded but still legible. Medical Ethics for Gentlemen, The Art of Conversation During Gout, and a Guide to Not Dying on a Steamer. You consider stepping inside, but instead, you lean against a railing. Oatcake, now a memory, and watch as a milk cart rumbles past, the horse snorts, the driver sings, and for a moment you feel something rare and quiet, a kind of alignment between place and time, like you were meant to be here in this exact moment, in this exact version of Edinburgh. Of course the city doesn't pause for you. Above you, a door opens with a creak. A woman tosses a bucket of water, or possibly something less poetic, into the street. You dodge just in time. She doesn't apologize. You don't expect her to. Mutual respect is implied in the successful avoidance of a splash. Another sound. Bells again, this time from St. Giles Cathedral, ringing out the top of the hour. You watch as the square fills with more movement. A man selling newspapers, a constable talking to a dog who seems unimpressed, a pair of tourists, yes, even in the 1870s, consulting a hand-drawn map that appears to be upside down. You're still a traveler, of course, but less of a stranger. Already you've started walking the city the way locals do, half with purpose, half with curiosity. You know which stones are loose. You know which street to avoid if you don't want to be accosted by a man offering to sell you authentic Jacobite shoe polish. And most of all, you know what time the train left and what time it arrived, and that somewhere in the in-between, you changed. Travel, even when slow and coal-fueled, does that to a person. It bends the clock, softens the boundaries, leaves you slightly more worn but immeasurably more layered. You reach into your pocket and feel the sprig of heather still there, pressed but undamaged. A talisman now, or at least a reminder, of the sleeper train, of the biscuit, of the harmonica, of arrival. You smile, just a little, then turn uphill again toward the sound of pipes, the scent of peat smoke, and the next chapter of your Victorian adventure. You climb steadily, boots finding their rhythm on the cobbled slope of the Royal Mile. The street narrows again, as though the city itself is encouraging you to keep going, onward and upward. Edinburgh has a peculiar way of nudging its guests uphill, rewarding effort with height, perspective, and the occasional whiff of fresh chimney smoke. The buildings are older here, not just old in the cracked plaster sense, but layered, floor upon floor built across centuries, windows overlapping like geological strata. Historians still debate which of the taller tenements on the Mile can officially claim to be the oldest residence in continuous use. What's more remarkable is that many of these multi-story stacks were once shared by people of vastly different social classes, from wealthy merchants on the upper floors to fishmongers and bone pickers in the shadowy basements below. You pass one such structure, its doorway a mouth of polished stone. A child darts past you, barefoot despite the cold, carrying a folded newspaper the size of her torso. She slips into the alley beside you and vanishes. Moments later, you hear laughter echoing off the walls. Somewhere nearby, someone's selling treacle toffee, and the scent follows you like a curious ghost. This is the Canongate stretch of the Mile now, slightly quieter but no less storied. Here, plaques whisper names you may recognize: Adam Smith, David Hume, Mary Queen of Scots, and a few you might not: Deacon Brodie, respectable cabinet maker by day, notorious burglar by night. His double life is said to have inspired Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and he even has a pub named after him, just up the road. You stop beside the Kirk of the Canongate, a calm rectangle of stone set back from the bustle. Through its gates you see a graveyard, gentle in the morning mist. The tombstones lean slightly, as though gossiping quietly with one another. A gardener in a flat cap trims hedges with reverent care, as though coaxing the churchyard into memory. It's strange how peaceful it feels. Cities rarely allow for true stillness, but here, just steps from the Royal Mile, there's a pocket of silence that feels older than the bells, older than the road. You sit on a nearby bench and take a breath. A moment ago, you were on a sleeper train rattling over rails with strangers, biscuits, and uninvited musicians. Now you're among moss-covered graves, reading inscriptions from the 1600s, and wondering whether time is truly linear or just very good at pretending. This stretch of Edinburgh, like much of the city, is dense with unseen history. Underground vaults snake beneath your feet. Layer upon layer of forgotten rooms, former prisons, storage cellars, and once secret passageways. Some say they're haunted. Others say that's just the wind of Arthur's seat playing tricks. Open debate continues among historians as to how many of these vaults were intentionally sealed and how many were simply abandoned when the world above moved on. Either way, they remain a reminder that the past in Edinburgh is never entirely buried. You rise from the bench and continue toward the palace. Yes, that palace. The Queen's official residence in Scotland, though in the 1870s, it's less frequently occupied than you'd expect. Holyrood House stands at the foot of the Royal Mile like a bookend, stately, slightly solemn, its stonework weathered into wisdom. You don't go in, not today. The gates are closed, and even in this imaginary visit, you feel like you'd need an invitation made of parchment and deference. Instead, you cross the street toward Holyrood Park. And there it is. Arthur's Seat. A sleeping lion of a hill, noble and shaggy, rising out of the urban sprawl with quiet authority. It's not a mountain, not really, but it feels like one. And in the 1870s, it's already beloved, an ancient volcanic relic with pathways beaten into it by centuries of boots, hooves, and the occasional overenthusiastic botanist. You begin the climb, slowly. The gravel path crunches beneath your feet. A crow observes you from a rock with the disdain of a museum curator. Behind you, the city shrinks. Chimneys become matchsticks, steeples mere fingers. And as you ascend, so does the wind. It gathers at your coat, tugs your scarf, presses against your chest like an invisible hand urging you onward. It smells faintly of heather and coal smoke, a paradox only Edinburgh could conjure. You reach a plateau. There's a bench, a good one, scarred by time, lichen painted, and perfectly placed. You sit. The city stretches below you, its spires and domes and craggy skylines softened now by distance. The castle stands firm. The train station glints dully. Somewhere down there is the bakery, the bookshop, and a harmonica's last note floating through a window. From up here, you can see the entire path you've taken since disembarking. You marvel, not for the first time, at the Victorian appetite for contrast. The trains they built roared across the country at unprecedented speed, and yet they still honored the long, slow walks to churchyards, to viewpoints, to places where silence mattered. You imagine what it would have been like to be a local in the 1870s, climbing Arthur's Seat to escape the city's clamor. No phones, no cameras, no Wi-Fi, just wind, boots, and the hope for a good view. Perhaps a biscuit, if you remembered to bring one. You did not. But the memory of that oatcake sustains you. You rest a while longer. A nearby couple, probably newlyweds from their blushes and bickering, takes turns pointing out landmarks. A collie dog zips past, ears like sails. A man with a notebook mutters something about basalt and scribbles furiously. The city below continues, and above it, so do you. You pull your coat tighter, smile to yourself, and begin the gentle descent back toward town. Your steps no longer hurried, your breath matched to the rhythm of history, your heart carrying the faint rumble of trains still steaming north. Your descent from Arthur's Seat feels slower than the climb. Not because of fatigue, but because of something quieter, reluctance. The view clings to your shoulders like a borrowed shawl, hard to fold away. As the gravel crunches beneath your boots, you glance back, just once more, at the city stretched below. The rooftops gleam like slates dipped in cold tea. The castle perches stoically, the train station a blur of industry. You imagine someone right now, stepping off a sleeper car, blinking at the pale Scottish daylight with oatcake-primed confusion, and down you go. You re-enter the city not with a bang, but a soft shuffle like a returning dream. The park gives way to pavement, to wrought iron railings and stone steps worn to curves by centuries of anxious souls. You pass a man feeding birds from a torn cloth bag. He offers you a chunk of something. You decline politely. It may be bread. It may be not. The streets begin to bustle now. Edinburgh in the late morning is a city of errands. Women in modest bonnets bustle from shop to shop with baskets. Clerks shuffle in and out of doorways, heads bowed beneath stacks of papers. Horses snort into the chill. And somewhere in the distance, a lamplighter. Yes, still needed, even after dawn, checks the extinguished lamps with something between pride and resentment. You stroll toward the grass market, one of the city's oldest commercial spaces. Once a hub of livestock trading and, less cheerfully, public executions, by the 1870s, it's more known for its pubs, tailors, and the occasional ambitious pickpocket. It sits beneath the castle's rocky flank, a wide square where the past clings to the air like soot. You pause near the place where the gallows once stood. There's no monument, just a subtle change in the stones. Historians still debate whether the location was chosen for its visibility, acoustics, or convenience to the local authorities. Public hangings were an event, after all, attracting crowds eager for spectacle and sausages in equal measure. But no gallows today, just a boy playing marbles and a woman arguing with a goose. The goose is winning. You step into a shop, dark wood, dusty shelves, and a scent that might be cinnamon or might be mildew that dreams of being cinnamon. It's an apothecary. Rows of bottles line the walls, labeled in elaborate Latin, aqua fortis, tinctura belladonna, syrupus papaverus. You gingerly sidestep a display of leeches swimming in slow circles. The clerk greets you with the enthusiasm of someone recently awoken from a 2-week nap. He offers you a tonic. For fatigue, he says, and mild existential dread. You purchase it out of politeness, though you're fairly sure it's just mint in water. Victorian medicine had a knack for dressing up disappointment. The label promises revivifying clarity. What it delivers is a tickle in the back of your throat and the faintest hint of soap. Back outside, you make your way toward Greyfriars Kirkyard, passing beneath an archway that looks like it should lead to a castle dungeon, but reveals only a peaceful path lined with gravestones. The graveyard is quiet, despite the city humming around it. You walk slowly, reading names, dates, and epitaphs. Some are illegible, others are heartbreakingly detailed. A faithful son taken too soon. Lost to the sea. May her pies never be forgotten. A small statue sits near the gates. Greyfriars Bobby, the famously loyal dog who, according to popular story, spent 14 years guarding his master's grave. Some historians believe the tale was embellished or even invented entirely by Victorian tourism boosters. But the statue remains, nose shiny from centuries of affectionate rubs. You give it a respectful pat. Bobby's service, myth or not, feels appropriate in a city where fact and folklore walk arm in arm, slightly tipsy. From here, the streets tangle. You take a wrong turn and find yourself in a dead-end courtyard where 3 cats are sunning themselves on an empty tea crate. One blinks at you, then looks away, as if to say you're interrupting a very serious meeting. Eventually, you find your way to George Fort Bridge, which stretches like a stone ribbon over the Cowgate. Below, carriages rattle past. Above, you spot a sign for an establishment with the unlikely name Ye Old Pie and Inquiry. You smile. Victorian naming conventions were nothing if not ambitious. You enter. The pub is dim, paneled in wood, and rich with the scent of beer and burnt toast. A fire flickers in the hearth. The chairs are uneven. The floorboards creak like they're trying to tell you something. You order a tea. The barman raises an eyebrow, then nods. A minute later, a chipped mug arrives. Black tea the color of varnish, and just as invigorating. You sip slowly, the heat sinking into your bones like sunlight after rain. Around you, conversations bubble quietly. 2 scholars arguing about the nature of virtue, a bookseller grumbling about overdue shipments, and a man in a cape reciting poetry to a fishmonger who seems unimpressed. You sit by the window and watch the street, the people passing by, the occasional flash of a train in the far distance, cutting across the landscape like a thought you forgot to finish. And you realize you're no longer a visitor. You've joined the rhythm. You've eaten the oatcake. You've climbed the hill. You've survived the sleeper train and the harmonica man and the soap-flavored tonic. You've listened to crows. You've walked among ghosts. You've sipped the tea, and now it sips you back. The city doesn't offer answers. It never has. But it offers something better. Continuity. A feeling that life, like the rails, stretches forward and backward in equal measure, and that you somehow are now part of the timetable. You finish your tea, wrap your scarf a little tighter, and step back out into the Edinburgh wind, which welcomes you not as a stranger, but as a sleeper returned. Back on the cobblestones again, you let your feet decide the direction. Edinburgh has stopped feeling like a city and started feeling like a very old book, one you're flipping through slowly, reading the margins as much as the chapters. And right now, your feet are taking you toward the heart of its scholarly soul, the university. Founded in 1583, the University of Edinburgh is already a few centuries old by your Victorian visit. Its stone buildings huddle together like old professors gossiping over a late lunch. You pass through the arch into Old College, its courtyard wide and echoing with unseen footsteps. Pigeons strut along the ledges as though they've been lecturing here for years. Inside the building, you find long corridors lit by tall windows and the occasional sputtering gas lamp. There's a scent here: chalk, ink, dust, and ambition. Students hurry past in long coats, their boots whispering across worn floors. A debate bubbles up behind one door. Loud voices, followed by a crash, then laughter. You half expect someone to open the door and invite you in for a spirited discussion on phrenology, or whether spontaneous combustion is a viable threat to mankind. Historians still puzzle over just how eccentric Victorian academia truly was. Some claim scholars would intentionally mislabel specimens in rival professors' offices. Others believe half the great advances of the age began with a casual remark over sherry. What is certain, in these halls, ideas had room to stretch their legs, even the peculiar ones. You linger near a lecture theater where a student with extraordinary sideburns is frantically copying notes from a blackboard. You try to read it. Something about anatomy and a drawing of what might be a spleen or a potato. Either way, it's very detailed. Outside, the campus spills gently into the surrounding streets. You pass Surgeons Hall, a magnificent, slightly ominous building. Within those walls, generations of medical students learned their craft. And if you've ever wondered where all those cadavers came from, well, so have historians. Grave robbing was a grim and lucrative business in earlier decades, especially before the Anatomy Act of 1832 legalized body donation. By the 1870s, the practice had officially ended, though the shadows it cast still lingered in whispered tales and creaky museum exhibits. You're drawn toward a small side path that leads to a museum wing, inside glass cases, pale light, and the sort of hush you only find in rooms filled with bones. You peer into one case and meet the gaze of a wax anatomical model. Her skin is half peeled to show the musculature beneath, but her eyes, glass, but somehow earnest, look right through you. A card at her base names her as Anatomical Venus. These teaching tools, popular across Europe, were part science, part sculpture, and, if we're being honest, part performance art. There's something oddly comforting about the precision. A body reduced to labeled systems, neat cross-sections, a chart with arrows. Life, organized. You step back into the daylight, feeling your own body just a bit more keenly. The wind tugs your coat open, you button it again, and now the streets change character, from cobbled quiet to something looser, more chaotic. You've wandered toward the south side, an area in flux even in the 1870s. Students, immigrants, merchants, it's where the stories pile up without always introducing themselves first. You pass a corner bakery and catch a whiff of buttered rolls. There's a line outside. The sign above the door reads Mac Taggart and Sons, bakers since 1792. You take your place in line, quietly enjoying the murmured gossip of those ahead of you. Apparently someone's cousin's neighbor's dog ate a bishop's hat. No one is quite sure how. When it's your turn, you buy a roll still warm from the oven. Crusty outside, soft inside, and tasting faintly of thyme. You eat it as you walk, brushing crumbs from your coat like a local. Further on, you pause beside a curious building with a faded sign, the Edinburgh Association for the Advancement of Rational Recreation. It's locked now, but a poster in the window lists past events: Moral Phrenology Night, Whist and Quiet Cheese, an illustrated talk on the dangers of unsupervised waltzing. Victorian leisure, it seems, had its limits. Still, recreation was serious business here. The 1870s saw a rise in self-improvement societies, where workers could learn to read, practice elocution, or debate ethics in candlelit basements. Some of it was driven by genuine enthusiasm. some by a national fear that idle hands might reach for gin rather than Play-Doh. You continue onward, thoughts pleasantly tangled. You pass a lamplighter again, perhaps the same one, perhaps not. He nods without stopping, a man bound to schedule. The city dims slightly behind you as the afternoon wears on. Now you find yourself entering the meadows, a great sweep of green stretching long and soft beneath an enormous sky. By the 1870s, the meadows has transitioned from drained loch to beloved public park, and its gravel paths curl gently like ribbon across the grass. Here, children play, some kicking a leather ball, others flying kites that sputter in the low breeze. A pair of older gentlemen sit on a bench, feeding pigeons and pretending not to notice each other's crumbs falling into their beards. A bandstand stands at the center, silent now but occasionally brought to life by brass ensembles that sound like optimism in horn form. Historians still debate whether the meadows was more valuable as a social hub or a health remedy. In an age of thick smog and crowded rooms, fresh air was seen as medicinal. Doctors sometimes prescribed it like medicine, 2 hours among trees, repeat daily. You find your own bench, slightly crooked but sun-warmed. The grass smells like spring, even if it isn't. You close your eyes just for a moment. Somewhere a harmonica starts up again. You don't open your eyes. You let it play. Eventually, you rise from the bench, not because you're tired of sitting, but because something in the rhythm of the city gently nudges you onward. The air has shifted. There's a golden tinge to the light now, that late afternoon hush when Edinburgh seems to exhale a little, like a gentleman unbuttoning his waistcoat after supper. You take a path that curves east past quiet flats with lace curtains and chimneys that lean just a bit. Laundry flaps lazily between buildings. Shirts, bloomers, and the occasional mysterious cloth that could be either a tablecloth or an ambitious handkerchief. You pass a girl skipping rope and reciting something that might be a rhyme or a curse in disguise. Soon, you reach a neighborhood where the streets narrow and tilt, like they're having a polite disagreement about which direction to follow. You've entered Canongate, the old burg within a burr, once a separate town, and still stubbornly proud of it. It's quieter here, slightly more worn, with buildings that squint at you as if trying to remember whether they owe you money. The Canongate Kirk looms ahead, its stone facade modest but dignified. The surrounding graveyard, overgrown in places, is a sleepy sprawl of tilted headstones and thoughtful crows. You walk through it slowly, not out of superstition, but out of respect. Some names here belong to poets, philosophers, candlemakers, or simply beloved mothers. Others are barely readable, worn smooth by rain and time. You pause by one, the grave of economist Adam Smith, whose ghost, you suspect, would be either appalled or delighted by modern snack pricing. Historians still argue whether his views on markets were more practical or philosophical. Regardless, his resting place is remarkably unceremonious for a man whose invisible hand has been shaking the economy ever since. You exit the kirkyard and find yourself near a shop that proudly advertises historical curiosities and mildly haunted trinkets. Inside, a bell tinkles as you enter. It smells of lavender, old books, and perhaps regret. The shopkeeper looks like he's been expecting you for years. He nods once, and then returns to polishing a crystal ball that's probably decorative, but just possibly sentient. You browse slowly. Weathered maps, tarnished lockets, a wooden prosthetic arm labeled for dramatic gestures. You buy a pressed flower between glass, allegedly from Mary, Queen of Scots' garden. Probably it's just a dandelion, but you like the story better. Back outside, the street tilts gently downhill toward Holyrood. This part of the Royal Mile is quieter, the stones smoother, the buildings crouched as though gossiping about visitors. And now in the distance, you see it, the Palace of Holyrood House. Still a royal residence in the 1870s, though Queen Victoria prefers Balmoral these days. But the grandeur remains. The gatehouse stands proud, guarded by two statues that seem unsure if they're lions or extremely judgmental dogs. You don't go inside, not today. Entry is limited, and besides, you're more interested in the ruined abbey next door. The Abbey of Holyrood, once majestic, now stands open to the sky. Its arches still hold their shape, despite centuries of weather and politics. Moss creeps across stone, birds flit between beams, and somewhere beneath it all, the echoes of royal weddings, burials, and the occasional dramatic monastic disagreement. You step inside, or rather, through the doorway where a door once stood. It's cool here, even in daylight. The silence feels earned. You sit on a stone ledge watching the clouds drift lazily overhead through the open roof. A single shaft of light falls on what was once the altar. Time here doesn't feel like an enemy or even a measurement. It feels like a soft blanket laid gently over everything, and it's here in the hush of ruined grandeur that you remember a story told earlier on the train, something about a queen, a dagger, and a secretary meeting a very abrupt end. Yes, this is the place. David Rizzio, private secretary and perhaps something more to Mary, Queen of Scots, was stabbed to death within earshot of this very palace. Historians still debate the true nature of their relationship, and whether Mary orchestrated revenge or simply survived as best she could in a web of courts and conspiracies. What's clear is that the incident left blood on the floor and legends in its wake. You imagine Mary walking these grounds, not in dramatic gowns with windblown hair, but wrapped in a shawl, trying to find a quiet corner where no one expected anything of her for 5 minutes. You think she'd have liked this ruined abbey. It doesn't ask questions. The light shifts again, cooler now. You rise, brushing imaginary dust from your coat, and then you do something quite Victorian. You decide to write a postcard. You find a quiet bench, produce a card bought from the haunted shop, and scrawl something illegible but earnest. You include phrases like unexpectedly atmospheric and unreasonably windy. You address it to no one in particular. Perhaps yourself, perhaps someone you haven't met yet. You tuck it into your pocket, meaning to post it later. From Holyrood, you begin the gentle climb back up the Royal Mile. Your steps slower, not from fatigue, but from contentment. You know now that you're not trying to reach a destination. You're just following the loop, letting the city unfold like a paper map warmed in your hands. The day is waning, and a few lamps flicker to life around you. You pause to watch a boy lighting one with a long pole. The flame pops into being like a thought remembered just in time. You nod to him. He nods back, and the light stays. As twilight begins to settle over Edinburgh like a velvet shawl, you wander back into the spine of the city, the Royal Mile. The sky is turning that uncanny indigo that seems unique to northern evenings, part dusk, part dream. The gas lamps begin their nightly glow, flickering against damp stone, casting soft halos on passing faces and pavement alike. The Royal Mile is thinning now. The morning bustle and scholarly debates have given way to something gentler. Shopkeepers pull shutters closed with practiced hands. Pub doors swing open, spilling golden light and the faint strains of fiddle music onto the street. The city is changing outfits, slipping into its evening clothes with quiet elegance. You walk past St. Giles's Cathedral again, but this time you notice something different. A small group has gathered near the Mercat Cross for what appears to be an open-air lecture, or possibly an overly confident man talking about his cousin's haunted boot. Either way, no one seems in a hurry, and neither are you. As you drift past Parliament Square, you overhear a constable and a chimney sweep debating the weather. She'll hold through tomorrow, the sweep says with the authority of someone who routinely climbs to where the clouds live. The constable disagrees politely but firmly. You suspect both are wrong, and the clouds themselves are undecided. The mile narrows again as you reach the Lawn Market. The buildings here lean a little more than strictly necessary, their windows like squinting eyes. You duck into a close, one of Edinburgh's famous alleyways, and emerge in a hidden courtyard where the air smells faintly of coal smoke and bread. A small sign catches your eye: Riddle's Court, rooms to let, meetings of a philosophical nature encouraged. You pause there, letting your gaze trace the brickwork, the iron balconies, the carved stone details that once impressed visiting nobles, and now simply wait for someone to notice them. And you notice them. Further down the close, you pass a man playing a concertina. He's not especially good, but he plays with feeling, and that makes all the difference. He nods to you mid-phrase, missing a note but not the mood. You toss him a coin, more for the effort than the melody, and he rewards you with a grin and a sea shanty in half-time. By now, you're near the Castle Hill stretch. The looming fortress watches over the city like a sleepy lion, silhouetted against the darkening sky. You don't climb to the castle tonight. That kind of grand, official visiting can wait. Instead, you find a spot nearby, an old stone bench tucked behind a crumbling wall, and sit. From here, you can see the rooftops descend in uneven terraces, the glow of windows here and there, the occasional puff of smoke from a stubborn chimney. A woman calls a cat in a language you don't recognize. The cat, of course, ignores her, and you think this is what you came for. Not the tour guides or the artifacts or even the sleeper train's strange charm. This quiet moment on a chill stone bench where the city breathes around you like a friend who doesn't need to fill the silence. The wind carries a smell you can't quite place. Hearth smoke, roasting chestnuts, burnt sugar and coal dust and history? Probably yes to all of it. You pull your coat tighter and lean back. Time behaves differently here. Minutes stretch and soften. Street sounds blur into a low murmur. The castle behind you isn't imposing, it's simply resting. Somewhere below, a pub door opens with a cheer and slams with a thud. A woman laughs, deep and sharp and full of something older than amusement. Footsteps echo down a wind. A dog barks twice, then decides it wasn't worth the effort. You watch the sky turn fully to night, and then out of the corner of your eye, you notice a small, wheeled cart approaching. It's pushed by a girl in a cap too large for her head. The cart rattles with glass bottles. She calls out softly, "Lavender water, sweet balm for nerves." You don't stop her. You simply watch as she passes, like a character from someone else's dream. The scent lingers. Faint, but real. It's almost time to return to the station. Almost. But not quite yet. You take the long way down the hill, past buildings that lean and whisper, past a set of stairs worn smooth as tea saucers. On the corner of a quiet street, you spot a flickering sign. Hot porridge served until midnight. You step inside. The shop is narrow, with wooden booths and a brass counter. A man in an apron nods at you as if you've been expected for hours. The porridge arrives steaming, thick, and faintly sweet. You drizzle a bit of treacle on top because when in Edinburgh and take your first spoonful. It's perfect. The woman across from you stirs hers slowly and hums a tune. You both pretend not to notice each other. Outside, the street glows with lamplight and possibility. A constable whistles past. A boy sells matches. The world turns gently. And you, visitor, dreamer, porridge eater, train rider, sit in the warm spoonful of a city that knows how to hold its past close, not as baggage, but as ballast. There's no hurry now. The train will wait. Everything in Edinburgh does, even the night. You eventually leave the porridge shop, full in the quiet way, not just with food, but with the kind of warmth that lingers longer than a meal. The air outside is cooler now, enough to draw a misty curl from your breath. The gas lamps have reached their full glow, casting soft golden halos over the cobbles, turning the street into a ribbon of flickering amber. You check a nearby clock. You've got time, but not forever. The sleeper train awaits, so you begin your walk back to Waverley Station, but meanderingly, as if each step might open another little chapter. You cross the North Bridge again, the wind now strong enough to tousle your hat if you're wearing one. From up here, the view is even more dramatic at night. Prince's Street below lined with glowing windows, and beyond it, the dark silhouette of the new town, orderly and still. A tram rolls past you with a clatter, sparking slightly on its line. It's nearly empty. The driver barely glances at you. He knows you're walking for the pleasure of it. The path down to the station takes you past the Scott Monument again, but this time it looks entirely different, bathed in lamplight, all shadow and spire. You pause. You can't help it. It seems taller now, more gothic, more dreamlike. Historians still argue whether Scott's actual legacy justified the grandeur of this towering tribute, but there's no denying its effect in moonlight. You half expect it to whisper something as you walk past. Down by Prince's Street Gardens, the grass glistens with dew, and the darkened trees sway like they're confiding in each other. You take the long curve past the Ross Fountain, dry for the season, but still regal in its greened metal, and finally approach the entrance to Waverley Station. And then, quite suddenly, the city disappears behind a glass and iron veil. Inside the station, it's all clinks and hissing steam and hushed announcements. Waverley in the 1870s is a marvel of modern travel, a great cavern of glass, soot, and potential. People move with quiet urgency. Porters wheel luggage. Children doze on benches, clutching dolls with missing buttons. A man sleeps sitting upright, his hat pulled low, his ticket tucked safely between his fingers. The great iron arches above you are soot-streaked, but still magnificent. Gaslight glimmers against windows and faces. You stand for a moment just to listen. It's not a loud place, but it's never silent. The hum of travel fills it, boots on tile, wheels on tracks, low voices echoing in a dozen directions. You make your way to the platform. There she is, your sleeper train, waiting like an iron caterpillar preparing for metamorphosis. The carriages are glossy, their polished exteriors reflecting the yellow glow of the lamps. Porters load trunks into the luggage van. A conductor checks a list, pencil behind one ear, mustache twitching thoughtfully. You approach your carriage. It has a brass number plate and a door handle cold to the touch. Inside, a narrow corridor lined with compartments. Carpet muffles your steps. Wood paneling gleams under oil lamps. The whole place smells faintly of leather, polish, and something indefinably railway. You find your compartment. It's compact, charming, and unmistakably Victorian. There's a small table beneath the window with a fold-down basin hidden behind a little wooden door, a shelf for your hat, a narrow bed that folds from the wall, already made up with crisp white linen and a rather thin wool blanket. On the seat, a folded card reads, "Tea will be brought before departure. Please ring for assistance." You sit, and the train shifts slightly under your weight. Somewhere down the platform, a whistle sounds, long and low, like the sigh of someone resigned to a journey. There's a tap at the door. A young porter enters, balancing a tray with a teapot, 2 cups, and a small plate of shortbread. "Evening, sir, or madam, or visitor," he says, as though unsure of your provenance. You smile, and he smiles back, setting the tray down with care. "Back to London, then? Or on to somewhere new?" You say something vague and polite, the kind of answer that satisfies without committing. He doesn't press, just nods. "Best enjoy the quiet while you can. These carriages tend to creak like ghosts with opinions after midnight." He winks, then vanishes down the corridor, his footsteps soft as a bedtime story. You pour yourself some tea. The cup is delicate, the kind with a handle barely big enough for one finger. The tea is hot and strong, with the faintest scent of bergamot. You nibble the shortbread. Crumbly. Comforting. You place your forehead against the cool window. Outside, the station bustles in miniature. Figures hurrying, lamps bobbing, steam rising in slow, lazy plumes. You realize you could fall asleep right here, right now, before the train even moves. But then, you hear it. A sharp hiss of released pressure, a clunk, a long, shuddering breath from the engine. The train is waking, your compartment shivers, the window trembles, and slowly, almost reluctantly, you begin to move. Waverley Station drifts away, the platform recedes, the darkened city peels back like the edge of a dream. You exhale. You've rejoined the train. The train groans into motion like a slumbering beast that suddenly remembered it has places to be. Your compartment sways gently as the wheels beneath you begin their familiar metallic lullaby. Outside, the city lights blur slightly, softened by the fog of steam and the haze of evening. Edinburgh melts away, stone by stone, spire by spire, like candle wax slipping down the sides of a well-burnt taper. Inside, it's warm and hushed. The oil lamps flicker slightly with each turn of the track. Their golden glow casts soft shadows on the mahogany paneling, on the brass fixtures, and on the thin lace curtain that dances at the edge of the window. You lean back into the cushioned seat and close your eyes for a moment, not to sleep just yet, but to savor the feeling of movement, of being carried forward through the dark. After a few minutes, you rise and explore. The corridor outside your compartment is narrow but elegant, lined with etched glass panels and brass handrails. The floor creaks faintly with each step, a sound less like a complaint and more like a confession. Further down, you discover the lavatory. Victorian train bathrooms are marvels of compromise, a porcelain bowl with a wooden lid, a delicate sink with water that arrives only after several vigorous turns of a stubborn tap, and a little mirror that seems designed to insult rather than flatter. A shelf above holds a tightly folded towel and a bottle labeled lavender water to refresh the traveler. You dab a little on your wrist. It smells like your aunt's guest room in midsummer, comforting and faintly suspicious. Continuing your exploration, you reach the end of the car and push through a heavy door into the next. The connection between cars is a short, rumbling tunnel with canvas walls and a floor that sways like the deck of a ship. You grip the side rails and step across. For a moment, you feel suspended in two worlds, between departure and arrival, past and future. Edinburgh and the unknown. The next carriage is the lounge car. It's dimly lit, upholstered in deep green velvet with accents of brass and walnut. A few other passengers are here, each softly contained in their own quiet moment. A man with a walrus mustache reads a newspaper, the pages rustling like dry leaves. A woman in a traveling cape embroiders something intricate and mysterious, possibly a doily, possibly a coded message. A boy, perhaps 10, sits cross-legged by the window, whispering to a mechanical bird with a winding key. You find an empty armchair near the fire grate where glowing coals provide a comforting illusion of heat. On a small table beside it rests a copy of Punch, 2 months out of date, and a short stack of playing cards that smell faintly of cigars and mint. From behind a screen, a steward appears. He's as round as the tea trolley he pushes, his vest slightly askew and his hair attempting escape. "Bit of cocoa?" he murmurs, with the gravity of an invitation to royalty. You accept, of course. He pours from a silver pot into a porcelain cup, adds a sugar cube, and offers a square of ginger biscuit. "We're crossing into the hills now," he adds, eyes twinkling. "Best to drink it before we start bouncing about." You take a sip. It's rich and dark, with just enough heat to chase the cool from your fingertips. You let the biscuit soften on your tongue. The lounge car rocks gently like a cradle fashioned by engineers and powdered wigs. Outside, the countryside has taken over. The dark shapes of the Pentland Hills rise like ancient, slumbering giants. Farms and villages dot the landscape, their lights flickering distantly through the mist. The moon, nearly full, casts a pale sheen across the landscape, silvering trees, rivers, and stone walls as the train curves northward. And suddenly, it's quiet. The lounge car, the corridor, your mind, they all seem to settle into the same rhythm. Even the whispers of the other passengers fade into a kind of collective dreaming. You sit back and think of the people who've taken this journey before you, aristocrats and poets, merchants and maids, runaways and romantics. Historians still debate how much influence sleeper trains had on Victorian mobility, whether they genuinely democratized long-distance travel or merely extended elite comfort to the countryside. Either way, they changed things. And change, like trains, is often only visible in hindsight. You glance at the boy again. He's asleep now, the mechanical bird clutched in one hand. Its wings twitch occasionally, as if it too is dreaming. The steward appears again. "They'll be dimming the lights shortly," he says gently. "Best finish your cocoa." You nod, draining the last sip, and thank him. He bows slightly, then disappears behind the screen like a magician who's just made himself vanish. You return to your compartment. It feels different now. Dimmer, cozier. Your bed has been folded down, the blanket tucked, a small cloth bag rests on the pillow, toiletries, a tiny brush, a note wishing you sweet slumber and gentle gradients. You change into your nightclothes, fold your coat neatly, and lie down. The train hums beneath you, a steady heartbeat. Outside, the highlands approach. Inside, you drift, not asleep, not awake, somewhere in between. You wake, not fully, just the way you do when your body adjusts in sleep and your mind skims the surface. A gentle jolt rocks through the compartment. The train curves. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once and is answered. You don't open your eyes just yet. The pillow is surprisingly soft for something designed in the 1870s. Your blanket smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender water. Eventually, you blink yourself awake, just a little. Not out of discomfort, but curiosity. You sit up slowly, stretch your neck, and turn to the window. The world outside has changed again. Gone is the cultivated lowland farmland of earlier hours. Now the hills rise steep and ancient, black against a star-brushed sky. Mist coils in the valleys below like slow breath. A river glints far off, catching moonlight like a silver thread pulled through velvet. You press your forehead to the glass, fogging it slightly. There's no town, no lamp, no sign of another human for miles. Only you, your train, and the landscape that hasn't changed in 1,000 years. Well, almost. The rails beneath you are a distinctly Victorian invention, a feat of iron and ambition. Historians still argue whether Scotland's remote highlands benefited more from the railways economically or culturally. For isolated communities, the arrival of the sleeper train was a mixed bag. More commerce and connection, yes, but also outsiders, oversight, and the creeping arrival of modernity. The train hisses slightly as it gains speed, the sound like a dragon clearing its throat in the distance. You settle back against the pillow. The bed creaks a bit, as if politely requesting that you stay still for the remainder of the ride. Just as you're closing your eyes again, there's a soft knock at the door. Not sharp, more like a tap, as though someone isn't sure whether they're meant to disturb you at all. You pause. Yes? You call, your voice groggy, uncertain. The door cracks open, revealing a girl in a dark blue uniform. Not quite a child, not quite grown. Sorry to trouble you, she says, holding up a small envelope. You dropped this at supper, I think. We found it near the teacups. You thank her and take the envelope. It's unmarked, sealed with a dot of wax that seems to have been pressed with a spoon rather than a signet ring. Before you can ask her anything else, she gives a quick, shy nod and disappears into the corridor. The door snicks shut behind her. You stare at the envelope. It isn't yours. You don't remember dropping anything at supper. You turn it over in your hands once, twice, and then carefully, slowly you open it. Inside is a single sheet of creamy paper folded twice. The handwriting is looping and neat, with just a hint of theatrical flourish. It reads, "If you find yourself near the Speen Bridge signal post just past midnight, look left. Some things remain even after they've gone." That's it. No signature, no date, no context. You stare at it. You look at the clock above the window. 12:02 a.m. You sit upright. Your breath fogs the window as you press your face to the glass again. The train is climbing now, high into the hills. The tracks curve along steep ridges, the drop-off sudden and vast. You squint into the darkness, then there. To the left, a sloping glen, a stand of ancient pine trees, and a shape. No lights. Just moonlight catching on what might once have been stone. A ruined house, an abandoned signal cabin, or perhaps nothing at all. But you think you see it. A structure half swallowed by bracken and time, sitting on the edge of a world that forgot it. A ghost of a building, no longer marked on maps, no longer visited by foot. You blink. It's gone. Or maybe the train has simply rounded a bend. You sit back, oddly exhilarated. You're not sure what just happened. A practical joke? A bit of railway folklore? Or maybe someone's strange idea of hospitality? Historians might debate the influence of Victorian superstition on rural train routes. Many conductors carried small charms, and a few companies even designed cars with mirrored ceilings to confuse spirits. You tuck the letter into your bag and lie down again. This time you don't expect to sleep, but you do. Not deeply, not dreamlessly, but peacefully, the way you sleep when someone else is steering, and all you have to do is surrender to the motion. Later, perhaps an hour or two, you're stirred by the faint sound of violin music. Not loud, not recorded, real. You sit up again, blinking. No one's in the corridor. The music continues, low and sweet, slipping through the floorboards like perfume. You step out, barefoot on the narrow carpet. The lounge car is dimly lit, but empty. A single gramophone turns slowly on a side table, though you're fairly certain no one wound it. The violin plays a melody half-remembered, half-invented, the kind people once danced to in Highland kitchens and train depots alike. A little plaque sits near the gramophone. It reads, "This lounge was dedicated to the memory of Mr. Ainsley Dunbracken, who played fiddle through the storm of '83 and never missed a note." You chuckle quietly, unsure if the plaque or the music is real. Does it matter? You return to your bed and slide under the blanket once more. The train climbs a little higher, glides a little further. The night listens, and so do you. You don't remember falling asleep again, but you must have, because now it's the faintest edge of dawn and everything feels soaked in that pearly, liminal light, just before the sun climbs fully into view, just after the stars bow out. Your compartment is cool, quiet, and still gently swaying. The rhythm of the train has become so familiar that your body now rocks with it naturally, like a leaf floating downstream. You sit up slowly, rubbing your eyes, the blanket falling to your lap in soft folds. The compartment feels smaller this morning, more intimate, more yours. The oil lamp is out. The tea tray is gone. Someone, perhaps the same shy porter, has left a little card by the window. Approaching Inverness, breakfast served in the dining car. You glance out the window. The view steals your breath for a moment. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in the quiet, respectful hush of beauty that sneaks up on you. Rolling fields, rimmed with stone walls, rows of heather, stubbornly blooming against the odds. In the distance, the misty blue shoulders of the Cairngorms rise and fall in slow procession. A herd of red deer stands by a stream, utterly indifferent to your passing. You take a deep breath, stretch, and decide to follow the card's suggestion. The corridor feels warmer now, touched by early sunlight. The lamps have been extinguished. The other passengers are slowly stirring, some already dressed, others emerging in travel robes or shawls, hair still mussed with sleep. You pass a woman humming tunelessly while pinning her hair with the help of her reflection in the glass. The dining car is brighter than before. Windows open to the day, linen tablecloths crisply set. A steward with a perpetually raised eyebrow greets you with a nod and gestures you to a table. You sit. A minute later, you're presented with a menu. It's not vast, but very Victorian. Options include porridge with salt, milk on request, sugar frowned upon, kippers, hot, aggressively scented, boiled eggs with or without shell fragments, toast with marmalade, orange only, coffee, described ominously as railway strength. You choose conservatively, toast, eggs, tea, and accept the little pat of butter that arrives in its own porcelain dish like a guest of honor. Across from you sits a man who looks like a retired lighthouse. Tall, weather-beaten, blinking at the morning as if it's personally betrayed him. He nods at you but doesn't speak. He saw something in the night too, you think. You eat in companionable silence, listening to the clink of cutlery and the occasional creak as the train adjusts to the turns of the Highland track. The tea is hot, comforting. The toast, slightly too brown but oddly perfect. The eggs? Well, they're trying their best. Somewhere near the end of your breakfast, another steward stops by and offers you a folded pamphlet titled Notes for Travelers, Curious Sights Between Perth and Inverness. You flick it open. There's a brief history of the line, how this particular stretch was carved in the 1860s, often by hand, through rough country and stubborn granite. It mentions the workers who lived in makeshift camps for months, sometimes years, isolated from the cities they'd left behind. Historians still argue how those harsh conditions shaped the culture of rail labor in Scotland. Some claim it forged solidarity and brotherhood. Others point to records of desertion and unrest, evidence of how hard it truly was. Your eye catches a sidebar, Beware the Bridge by Dalmagary. Several accounts report a flicker of light seen near the bridge just before the river curve. Railway workers believed it was the spirit of a foreman lost during a spring flood, still checking the integrity of the timber. You raise an eyebrow and glance toward the window. The train is approaching a river bend. A bridge looms, iron, angular, steady. Nothing unusual. But then again, perhaps the unusual doesn't perform on cue. You fold the pamphlet and return to your eggs. Later, full and warm, you walk slowly back to your compartment. Something about the train in the morning feels different, livelier, as though it's become more than a machine, now a waking village on wheels, full of brushing teeth and searching for gloves, of yawns and luggage rearrangement and whispered debates over how long until the next station. In your compartment, the bed has been folded up. The space is tidy again, as if the night and all its mysteries were nothing more than dreams. You sit and gaze out the window, the sun now higher in the sky. The world glides past, ordinary and magical all at once. Soon the conductor will come by, you'll step off the train, and the journey, at least this one, will end. But not quite yet. For now, there's still the sound of the tracks, the soft hiss of steam, and the memory of a letter with no return address. You lean your head against the window and smile. By now, the morning has established itself, confident, golden, and gently bustling. Your compartment swells with the growing brightness, casting sunbeams across the worn velvet upholstery and catching flecks of dust that swirl in a lazy waltz. The train hums steadily onward, winding past locks that lie flat as slate and forests that look as though they haven't changed since the Druids were in fashion. There's a knock at the door, softer than before. You've come to recognize these knocks. The first was cautious, the second, courteous. This one is more apologetic. You open it to find a familiar face. The same steward who offered you cocoa the night before, his vest slightly straighter now, but still bearing the bulge of a man who believes deeply in second breakfast. Morning, he says with a sheepish grin, holding out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper and string. This was left for you at the last stop. We didn't notice until after we'd pulled away. Apologies for the delay. You thank him, and he tips his hat before moving on, off to deliver something far less mysterious, you assume, like toast crumbs or tea-related gossip. You sit back down and examine the parcel. It's light, lumpy, wrapped tightly. The label just says, Carriage 4, Compartment 12, for the sleeper. You raise an eyebrow. For the sleeper? Not passenger, not your name, just that. A little theatrical, but we're well past the point of pretending this is an ordinary journey, aren't we? You untie the string and peel back the paper. Inside, a small cloth-bound book. Its cover is worn but elegant, burgundy with gold detailing faded by time and touch. There's no title on the front, just a symbol, a simple line drawing of a keyhole. You open to the first page. The handwriting is unfamiliar but elegant, italic script, the kind taught in girls' boarding schools and by overly strict governesses who believe posture could fix anything. It begins, to the sleeper. You are not the first, you will not be the last, but you are here, and so were we. You turn the page. What follows is a strange compilation. Snippets of diary entries, sketches of train compartments, fragments of stories about other people who rode this same line. Years, decades ago. A schoolteacher from Stirling who believed the train knew her thoughts. A retired botanist who discovered a new species of moss while gazing out at the cairngorms. A newlywed couple who swore the sleeping car was haunted by a woman who borrowed hairpins. Some of it is clearly fiction. Whimsical, embroidered with flourishes too poetic for a railway memoir. But other bits feel familiar, real. You find yourself wondering if someone, maybe several someones, have been adding to this little volume over the years, passing it from hand to hand, carriage to carriage. Historians sometimes speak of palimpsest experiences, where new memories layer over old ones without fully erasing them. You think this book might be one. One page has a pressed thistle glued into the corner and a scrawled note, saw a stag from the second bend after the glen. Might have been watching us. You look out your window instinctively. Just pine trees, just light, just you and the train. You close the book gently and set it beside you. Not everything wants to be solved. A few minutes later, the train slows. Not stopping, just catching its breath. The whistle sounds once soft and dignified, as if clearing its throat before a speech. You recognize the shape of the landscape now, long curves of hills, the shimmer of the Bowley Firth in the distance. Inverness is near. You stand, stretch, and begin to gather your things. The steward passes once more and gives you a knowing look. Nearly there, he says. Tea for the road? You nod gratefully, and he disappears like a well-trained rabbit into a cabinet of polished walnut. When he returns, he hands you a tiny lidded cup, porcelain, not paper, and a biscuit nestled into the saucer. The tea smells of bergamot and something faintly minty. You take a sip and let it warm your mouth. The train begins its final descent toward the station. The fields give way to stone buildings, smokestacks, and telegraph poles. You catch glimpses of the river Ness, winding its way like a silver ribbon through the town. And then, just like that, the journey that stretched across night and hills and music and cocoa is coming to a close. The train pulls into the platform with a gentle sigh. People begin to rise, straighten coats, brush down sleeves, check pocket watches. You gather your bag, the mystery book tucked securely inside. You glance one last time at your compartment, the place where you slept, dreamt, read strange letters, and almost certainly heard a ghost fiddle. It's already beginning to fade into memory. You step down onto the platform. The air is cooler here, fresher somehow. Inverness greets you not with a fanfare, but with the quiet bustle of a morning town. Boots on stone, carts rattling, a gull somewhere shouting half-heartedly about something fish-related. Behind you, the train releases one final hiss, like a storyteller finishing a long, rambling tale. You turn to look. The sleeper car windows reflect the morning sun, and for just a second you think you see your own face there. Not as it is, but as it was last night, half asleep, forehead pressed to the glass, staring into the dark. Then it's gone, and you walk forward. The platform at Inverness Station feels like an odd place to return to the real world, if that's what this is. You step down from the train and immediately feel the difference. The ground doesn't sway. The air smells of chimney smoke and damp stone, not oil lamps and polished wood. The sky, still pink in parts, begins to yawn open as the sun lifts behind the rooftops. Other passengers move about with the sleepy choreography of arrival, stretching arms, gathering children, clinking suitcase clasps. A man in a deerstalker sneezes into a crumpled handkerchief. A young woman adjusts her gloves and squints at the town as though it has personally wronged her. You walk slowly, your bag slung over your shoulder. It's not heavy, but it feels weightier somehow, burdened with all the oddness the night offered. The little book wrapped in cloth peeks out from under your scarf, just enough to remind you it's still there. Around you, Inverness wakes up in earnest. Milk carts creak. A constable leans on a post with exaggerated purpose. Somewhere behind the station, a bell rings, not a warning or an alarm, just the hourly sort, marking time in that steady, Victorian way. If you were expecting something dramatic, someone waiting with a sign bearing your name, or a small band playing pipes, you'll be disappointed. But then again, perhaps this has always been a story about the quiet. You pass through the station's small gate and into the town proper. The buildings are stone, mostly gray and squat, but not unfriendly. Chimneys cough into the sky. You spot a bakery already open, its windows fogged with steam and sweetened yeast. A few townspeople glance at you, just another traveler with slightly tousled hair and sleep-crumpled clothes. If they knew where you'd been or what you'd seen, well, they probably still wouldn't care. Inverness is used to people arriving from somewhere strange. You duck into a narrow side street, your boots clicking softly on cobblestones. Here the buildings close in a little tighter, like they're gossiping. A painted sign above a shop window reads, MacLeod's Antiquarian Books and Curiosities. You hesitate. Then, as if carried by the last puff of steam from your sleeper car, you open the door and step inside. The bell above the door jingles with a kind of surprise. No one greets you immediately. The shop smells like every good bookshop should. Old paper, varnish, and that hard-to-define scent of accumulated thinking. Rows of shelves lean in strange directions like ships tilting at sea. You run a finger along the spines, Scottish folk tales for Hearth and Hill, letters from the Jacobite front, the Railway Ghost Compendium, Volume 2. Intriguing. You nearly pass the counter before you notice the woman sitting behind it, late middle age, spectacles on a chain, knitting something lumpy in a shade of green that defies fashion or logic. She glances up. Sleeper train? She asks without prompting. You blink. Yes, she nods. You have the look. You wait. She doesn't elaborate. After a moment, you reach into your coat and draw out the small cloth-bound book. Her eyes follow the motion with unmistakable recognition. Left for you? She asks. Yes. On board. Another nod. Always is. Sit, if you like. You perch on the stool near the counter. She sets her knitting aside and slides the book toward her, fingers tracing the cover without opening it. They leave these, she says, now and then, when the train knows someone's listening. You're not quite sure how to respond. You won't find an author or a publisher, she continues, not in the usual sense, but you'll find echoes, from all sorts. Historians still argue whether certain collections, like the mysterious Railway Journal of 1871 or the Cairnfield Diaries, were written by a single person or compiled from many anonymous voices across time. No one can say for sure. This book might be one of them. She finally opens it to a random page, nods to herself, and closes it again. Keep it, she says. You're part of it now. You wrap it carefully and place it back in your bag, feeling like you've been handed something more significant than ink and thread. She picks up her knitting again. Tea? You smile. Always. A kettle boils somewhere in the back. You sip your tea slowly while the shop settles into the rhythm of its quiet day. Eventually, you thank her and step back out into the street, blinking against the growing light. You could head for your lodgings now, or maybe you'll walk down by the River Ness. Maybe you'll just stand here for a while, letting the wind tousle your collar and the moment stretch out unhurried. Behind you, the train has already gone. Ahead, the rest of your day awaits, still wrapped in fog and possibility. But between those two things, somewhere in the night, you traveled not just miles, but centuries, and the line remains. Later that morning, as you make your way along the River Ness, the wind tousles your scarf, carrying with it the distant clang of a ship's bell and the occasional honk from a goose who clearly thinks it owns the promenade. The river flows confidently, as if it knows something you don't, and perhaps it does. You pause at a low stone bridge to admire the current, gray-green and rippling, speckled with early sunlight, and watch a fisherman cast his line without any hope but great dignity. You feel a little like that line, cast into a space between time and tide. With your boots ticking along the wet cobbles, you pass quiet shop fronts, small hotels, and a sign pointing toward the Caledonian Canal. There's a moment when the street narrows again, and you smell peat smoke drifting from an unseen chimney. It's not unpleasant, earthy, warm, a little melancholy. Then you spot it. Tucked between a tailor's and a post office is a narrow door painted a shade of blue that most people would call midnight or storm. Above it, barely visible unless the light hits just right, is a brass plaque, Northern Rail Office Archive Division. You're not sure what compels you to try the handle. It's not a museum, not a tourist attraction, but the door opens with a soft click and suddenly you're inside. It's quiet, unsurprisingly. Rows of wooden filing cabinets stretch out like pews in a church no one prays in anymore. The air smells of ink and linen. At a worn desk near the back sits a man in a waistcoat several decades out of date, spectacles perched on his forehead like a second pair of eyebrows. He doesn't look up. "Sleeper line?" he asks, turning a page. "You really must have a look." "Yes." He nods absently. "Figures." You approach. He gestures to a nearby cabinet labeled MISC. Incidents, 1872 to 1911, and says, "You might find something. Or not. The line's choosy." With curiosity overriding your sense of schedule, you slide open the drawer. Inside, yellow documents, some typed, some handwritten, many annotated in different inks across different years. You skim a few. June 1879, passenger reports hearing singing in the East Corridor. No singer located. September 1886, woman found sleeping in unbooked compartment, woke with no memory of boarding. April 1892, report of man exiting train before arrival at station. Witnesses deny any stop occurred. You read slower now, heart picking up. Some are more personal, more poetic. Shared a car with an elderly woman who knew my mother's name. Mother died in 1854. Compartment door opened onto a hallway that did not belong to this train. There's one entry, undated, scribbled on a torn ticket stub. Fiddle again. Always the same tune. You slide the drawer shut, suddenly aware that someone else has entered the room. It's the archivist. He holds out a small envelope with your name written in looping penmanship. You accept it cautiously. Inside, a pressed sprig of heather and a single sentence. You saw it. That's enough. You want to ask who wrote it, who decided you needed to see that, but the archivist has already returned to his papers and the room seems to politely discourage questions. You leave quietly. Back outside, Inverness has shifted again, subtly, the way towns do once you've had a very peculiar conversation within them. The streets are busier now. Someone is selling roasted chestnuts. A pair of children zoom by on wheeled contraptions that can only be described as Victorian skateboards. You see the postman from earlier again, this time wearing a red scarf and balancing what appears to be a letter addressed simply to the gentleman in compartment 8. You wonder if the postman knows. You wonder if anyone really knows. Historians still argue whether the Victorian rail experience was more about speed or symbolism, whether people boarded trains to escape their lives or simply rearranged them. Some claim sleeper trains reflected a growing obsession with control over time. Others say it was about surrender, letting yourself be carried, unsure of where you'd wake up or who you'd become. You turn that idea over in your mind like a coin in a pocket. Your boots crunch over frost-rimmed leaves. You pass a row of iron lampposts that lean just a little to the left. In the distance, a clock tower begins to chime the hour, noon. But the feeling of the train, the rhythm, the glow, the hush of strangers in a moving corridor hasn't quite left you, and you're starting to suspect it never will. You decide to walk along the canal now, away from the bustle of the main streets. The towpath is muddy, your boots squelch slightly, and a heron watches you with the deep suspicion of someone who's seen too many people make eye contact and then ask about fishing licenses. The water moves slowly, thick and glassy, reflecting the cloud-streaked sky above. There's a barge tied up nearby, paint flaking, a kettle steaming gently from the little stovepipe on its roof. You wonder if someone lives aboard. You wonder if they know about the train. A bit further on, you come to a bench. It's a simple wooden thing with one of those brass plaques that always promise someone else sat here more meaningfully than you. This one reads, "For Hamish, who always caught the 8:05, even in his dreams." You can't help it. You sit down. From here, the canal stretches off like a ribbon, looping gently into the highlands beyond. Somewhere far up that path, though not visible, lies the railway again. that strange thread running north, tying together the sleepers and the waking world. And it hits you. This whole trip, strange as it was, happened at a particular rhythm. Train journeys, especially in the Victorian age, weren't just about speed. They were about sequence. One clattering moment after another, a whistle, a jolt, a corridor filled with lace and steam, a cocoa cup set down with a satisfying clink. You didn't move through the train, it moved you, like a needle guiding thread through fabric. The canal shares that rhythm now. You watch the slow passage of a barge as it navigates a lock, water bubbling and hissing. It's a quiet, practiced thing, like a story told too many times to need words anymore. You let your eyes close just briefly, and the sounds come back. The clatter of wheels on track, the faint strains of that fiddle always just beyond the door. The steward's knock, the soft clunk of a carriage coupling somewhere ahead. In your mind, you're back inside the sleeper, hands curled in your lap, breath fogging the window pane as you pass dark pine forests. Historians still argue whether these sensory memories are truly accurate or stitched together by imagination. Were Victorian train compartments truly so plush? Did the lamps really flicker like that? Did conversations with strangers carry that dreamy after-midnight quality? But the answer, as with most history, depends on who's remembering. You reach into your coat pocket and find a small napkin, folded carefully, printed with the logo from the sleeper car's tea service, a slightly wonky thistle with a monocle. You chuckle. At some point, you pocketed it, perhaps without noticing. It feels impossibly silly and impossibly precious. You rise from the bench and continue your walk, this time heading uphill toward a row of townhouses, perched like watchful old aunts. A lamplighter passes you. No, not a real one. A tourist reenactor in a waistcoat and cap, posing for photos near the cathedral. But the illusion is strong, and when you pass a certain iron gate, you pause. Behind it lies a small garden, slightly wild, its path overgrown with lavender and moss. There, under a crooked yew tree, sits another bench, and on it, two elderly people, man and woman, perhaps a couple, perhaps not, nursing cups of something warm, looking for all the world like they've been waiting for someone. You smile. You don't approach, of course. Some stories don't want an audience. But as you pass, the woman looks up and gives a tiny nod as though to say, "You're on the right path, sleeper." You nod back. Time in Inverness flows differently today. Not in straight lines, but in spirals and loops and familiar echoes. You begin to suspect that certain journeys never fully end, that they leave impressions on you, like thumbprints on softened wax. And just as you round a corner toward the town square, you hear it. Faint. Almost imagined. A train whistle. Far off, but not far enough to forget. It's evening again by the time you return to your lodgings. A modest stone guest house with ivy creeping up the walls and a brass bell you ring at the front desk. The landlady welcomes you with a nod and a comment about the sharp chill in the air, then disappears with the kind of quiet efficiency only possible after 40 years of watching people arrive and vanish again. You climb the creaky stairs to your room and find everything just as you left it. The bed slightly unmade, a travel guide to the Highlands open to a page you definitely didn't bookmark, and a kettle that groans politely when you turn it on. You brew some tea, strong, black, and a little too hot, and set it by the window, watching as the shadows stretch over the rooftops outside. The view from here includes a sliver of the tracks you arrived on. At this hour, there are no trains passing, only the occasional flicker of signal lights, blinking red or green like indecisive stars. You wonder how many trains are still running at this time. You wonder if any of them are that train. There's no label for it, no timetable, just the line. When it finds you, or you find it, it doesn't need explanation. You settle into the armchair beside the bed and pull out the little cloth-bound book again. You've resisted opening it since the bookshop, but now, with the lights low and the hum of the kettle still warm in your ears, you give in. The first page is blank, so is the second. Then, on the third, your name. Just your name, written in a looping script, unmistakably not your own. Beneath it, Compartment 4, southbound, Tuesday next. You blink. Tuesday? You hadn't planned to stay that long. And yet, you flip through more pages. Some are empty, others contain fragments of stories, descriptions of corridors and conductors, poems written in pencil, diagrams of curious mechanical devices. One page includes what looks like a lunch menu, although your quite shield jelly with spiced rhubarb was never in season. Then, about halfway through the book, you find a sketch, a sleeper car labeled in neat handwriting. You trace the compartments, 1, 2, 3, and then 4, your compartment. It's been circled in ink, and below it, a note. The one with the window that sticks. Don't open it too far. Of course, you remember it now. The little window with the stubborn latch which had clattered open during the night, letting in the scent of pine and coal smoke. Historians still argue whether passenger experiences on Victorian sleeper trains were truly individualized or simply fell into patterns. Some suggest passengers unconsciously recreated familiar domestic rituals to make the cars feel like home, arranging boots just so, folding coats a certain way, leaving biscuit crumbs in corners like misplaced offerings. You think about your own rituals on the train, tapping your ticket against the doorframe before entering, stirring your tea counterclockwise, always glancing into the mirror in the corridor before returning to your compartment, just in case the reflection didn't match. You don't remember doing these things intentionally, and yet they seem essential now. A loud crack outside startles you, but it's only the wind slamming a loose shutter. The room darkens further, so you light a single candle, letting its flickering glow cast long shadows over the pages. You turn another page. This time you find writing in a familiar hand, your own. But it's not something you remember writing. Not exactly. The ink is slightly smudged as if it had been closed too soon. The train bends around the mountain like a ribbon being tugged. The sea to the west glitters like a thing trying to be remembered. You stare at the words, another page, another entry, even older. A man boards at midnight, carrying only a compass at Rook. He says nothing until Waverley. Then he asks for milk. You close the book gently, suddenly unsure whether you're the reader or the author, or both. The room feels warmer now. You've kicked your boots off without noticing, and your coat is draped over the chair. The candle flickers lower. Outside, you hear that sound again, a distant train, closer than before. The tracks aren't visible from your window now, but you don't need to see them. You feel them, a deep vibration under the floorboards like something remembering how to move. And then, a soft rustle at your door. You rise slowly and open it. Nothing's there, just the hallway, empty, still. But on the floor lies another envelope. This one doesn't bear your name, it just says, "For whoever's awake." You don't open it, not yet. Some things are better left for morning. You place the envelope on the table, extinguish the candle, and settle into bed. The sheets are cold at first, then gently, quietly warm. You close your eyes, listening to the silence. Except it isn't silence, it's the echo of wheels turning. The last morning of your journey arrives in layers. At first, there's only a gray softness behind your eyelids, a sky not quite committed to dawn. Then the smell of something faintly toasted, bread, or perhaps memory. Next, a muffled clatter from downstairs, someone else waking. A door creaks open, then shut. Footsteps on the stairs, fading into hush. You stretch beneath the covers, muscles reluctant, spine stiff from the day before. And for a moment, just a moment, you forget which bed this is. Train bed? Guest house bed? Some peculiar in-between? Outside your window, the clouds have split just enough to let in a sliver of gold. A shaft of Highland morning touches the sill, warming the side of your tea mug still resting there from last night. The canal, in the distance, steams like it's exhaling. You dress slowly. Your clothes still carry the faint scent of coal smoke and lavender polish from the sleeper car. It's subtle, but enough to trick your brain into thinking you've already boarded another train, that your feet should be braced against gentle rocking. As you tie your boots, your eyes drift to the envelope you left unopened, for whoever's awake. The paper is soft, the ink slightly smudged at the edges as though handled many times. You open it now. Inside, a small card with one printed line. Your return ticket is already in your pocket. You check instinctively, and yes, there it is. Folded into the breast pocket of your coat, a rectangular slip of cardstock bearing your name, a route, and a time, tonight. Compartment 4. You blink, confused, but the confusion feels more like déjà vu than alarm. You descend the stairs. The landlady greets you with a warm nod and a slice of toast already waiting. She doesn't mention the envelope or the ticket. She simply says, "Train will be on time." It usually is. As you chew, you notice something strange about the guest book by the door. The most recent entry before yours is dated 1876. Same name, similar handwriting, a doodle in the margin, a fiddle, and a teacup. You don't mention it. She wouldn't explain, even if you asked. Some things, it seems, are not for the asking. Back outside, Inverness has dressed in sunlight. The shops are opening. A man sells papers with the wrong date on the headline. A girl chases a dog that looks like it belongs in an oil painting. You wander again through the cathedral grounds, past the garden with the couple who are no longer there. The bench is empty, but a new thermos sits on the seat, steaming faintly, suddenly, and you suspect it's not yours to take. You walk without direction, yet always toward something. At the station, the air is warm with engine breath and metal. The train waits again, different yet familiar. Same brass fixtures, same velvet seats. The conductor smiles at you with faint recognition, tips his cap, and checks nothing before waving you through. Compartment 4. It's just as you left it. Your coat still hangs from the hook, the window still sticks, the teacup on the fold-out tray has been washed and replaced. And once again, the journey begins. Historians still argue whether the great age of railway travel ever truly ended. Some claim it died with the diesel engine. Others say it survives in spirit in model trains and childhood dreams, and the strange longing people feel when hearing a distant whistle. You settle into your seat. You don't check the map. This train doesn't always go where you expect, or even where you remember. Outside, the trees blur. The sky deepens. Somewhere far ahead, someone plays a fiddle, and someone else dozes with a book in their lap. And the train moves forward, as trains always do, carrying you, not back to where you began, but deeper into something older than memory, something rhythmic, something soothing, something a little strange. So now, as the train rolls on through shadowed glens and quiet moors, let your thoughts soften. Let your breathing slow, in time with the gentle sway beneath you. The world outside the window is a blur of trees and hills, softened by dusk, wrapped in fog like an old photograph held too close to the hearth. There's no rush now, no need to unpack the meaning of the journey. Some travels are best felt rather than understood. Let the faint hum of the tracks become your lullaby. Let the scent of the velvet curtains and polished wood lull you, not into forgetting, but into a kind of peaceful remembering. Maybe you're still in that compartment, just past the dining car seat by the window. Maybe your boots are tucked neatly beside the bed, your teacup warm in your hand, or maybe none of this is real. Just the ghost of a journey, the kind that drifts between sleep and story, never needing to prove itself. Either way, you've earned your rest. Close your eyes now. Let the rhythm of the rails carry you. The carriage is warm, the blanket is light, and the train just keeps going.